A voice wondered where she was. After all, she was surrounded by endless darkness, unable to see anything in front of her. Gradually, voices started to echo from afar. Apparently, some noblewomen were gossiping about the way His Majesty had looked at the crown prince, saying it was spine-chilling to witness. One of them explained that no father would want to hurt his son. Since the prince was the future ruler of the Huppert Empire, the king had just given him a harsher than usual expression of love. The voice wondered if that's really what she had heard, because these people were saying weird stuff, like the names of empires. Another noblewoman added that either way, the prince had grown a lot since they last saw him. He already had the height of a grown man. She sighed, saying it was a shame Queen Elise wasn't around to see him like this. Hearing that sparked something in the main girl's memory. That's when it hit her. She was probably inside the world of a book she had just finished reading. She remembered her final moments. Getting hit by a truck while trying to save a cat. And yeah, that truck probably launched her into this world. Celebrating, she said goodbye to her pathetic old life. Maybe that cat she saved right before dying had given her a stroke of luck. Since she already knew the plot of the book, it didn't really matter which character she'd reincarnated as. Her success was guaranteed. She started wondering whose body she ended up in. Maybe a stylish villainess? Or an elegant daughter of some royal family. Being born into a rich family would definitely make things easier. But even being a countryside girl had its charm. She thought back to how hard her past life had been. So in this new life inside the novel, she was gonna live it up. Luxury style. While she was lost in all these thoughts, a boy appeared from behind some bushes. He reached out his hand and grabbed something. Confused, she suddenly noticed her body was lifting off the ground. Panicked, she tried to say something, but only a meow came out. Shocked by the sound that left her mouth, she had to face reality. She thought she'd be the protagonist, or maybe even the villain. She would have settled for a side character or background extra. But nope, not even human. As the boy stared at her, she realized she had turned into a tiny cat, smaller than the palm of a hand. Her hands were covered in soft white fur. Wait, she should probably call them front paws now. She remembered how, in her old world, cats were loved by everyone. But in this novel, things were very, very different. The book was called Souls Devoured by Darkness. She had read that tragic story on a friend's recommendation. The obsessive psychosis of the female lead toward the male protagonist was described in painful detail. It was the kind of thing that both captivated and haunted readers. Even so, she remembered rooting for them to end up together. And she also remembered all the lore. Huppert was the biggest empire on the Demeter continent. It was where Cillian Gunther Reinhardt, the male lead, would become emperor. When the empire was founded, an old priest had made a prophecy. It said cursed cats would bring ruin to the empire. Because of that, villagers hunted those animals down. Scared citizens searched every corner of the land and wiped out every cat they could find. Centuries passed. Now, you wouldn't find a single whisker anywhere in the entire kingdom. The prophecy had been fulfilled, and the empire thrived in peace and prosperity. So, yeah, knowing all of that, of course she had to be reincarnated as a cat. In Huppert, kids were taught from a young age that cats were evil creatures and should be killed on sight. Now she was trembling in this boy's hand, totally convinced she was about to die. Just then, some soldiers came over, asking if something had happened to His Majesty. He calmly replied no and waved them off, saying he wasn't feeling well and they should go hunting some other day. They nodded and left. Still in the boy's grip, the little cat had zero doubts now. Looking at him, he matched the novel's description perfectly. In Huppert, only royals had red eyes. And among the royal family, only one guy could have inherited Queen Elise's iconic ebony hair. The insanely handsome young man who had caught her could only be one person, Cillian Gunther Reinhardt, Crown Prince of the Huppert Empire. He was known in the novel as the bloodiest tyrant to ever exist. And now that he knew about the prophecy, it was obvious. As soon as he realized she was a cat, he was going to kill her. But that wasn't fair. She hadn't even been part of the destruction the cats were blamed for in the Empire. She was just a poor human who died trying to save a cat. She tried to somehow send that message to His Majesty, that inside this tiny cat body was actually the soul of a human. But, well, being a cat makes communication just a little too hard. Hearing the creature in his hand meowing nonstop, the prince wondered what it was trying to say. Thoughtfully, the young man pointed out that the animal was a cat. Well, yeah, kinda obvious. Frozen in place, the little cat realized that maybe he had never seen one before. He probably only knew cats from drawings and illustrations since they were supposed to be extinct in the Empire. She tried to explain she knew the future of the Empire and how it would fall, but no matter how hard she tried, she was still just a cat meowing like crazy. The prince kept staring at her, now with a darker look in his eyes. Suddenly, she felt herself land on something soft. she realized she was now inside the prince's pocket, wondering what the heck he was doing. Already inside the palace, she could hear footsteps and wondered where he might be headed, waiting anxiously without even seeing the world outside. Maybe instead of the garden or somewhere outdoors, he wanted to kill her somewhere else? A hand reached toward her and placed her on a table. He sat across from her while she feared her end had finally come. The prince said the creature looked a bit different from what books described. Its teeth didn't even reach past the chin, and the claws didn't seem scary at all. He wondered if it was just because she was still a kitten. The protagonist thought, what the hell did this world think cats were supposed to be like? As he poked at her, the prince added that, despite all that, the books did get one thing right. This creature was talented at hiding its evil nature behind cuteness to trick humans. He kept watching her shake nonstop as he stared her down. He said it made sense that people thought cats were adorable. That statement left the girl totally stunned. Cillian stared thoughtfully at the little cat in front of him. Then he reached out his hand and asked her to give him a paw. So she did. Next, he told her to roll over and give him a high five. Finally, he asked her to bite his finger. That last one made her take a step back. Was he just looking for a reason to kill her? Hesitating, she walked toward his hand and bit him really gently, more like a kiss than a bite. Cillian stared at his finger silently. Then he said it was kinda weird, because it really felt like this animal could understand everything he was saying, which made her the only living being who did. As the dinner table was set, the prince wondered what kind of food he should give this little thing in front of him. The kitten wondered why he was calling her this thing. Like, did he think she was some kind of object? Still, it seemed like he had decided not to kill her, for now, since he was thinking about feeding her instead. As he poured milk into a dish, the girl thought, considering she was supposedly the cat that would destroy the empire, according to the prophecy, she was lucky to even be alive. Apparently, the prince looked to be around 18 or 19. In the novel, he got crowned right after becoming an adult. That's when the story started. So she figured she must have been dropped into the timeline before the novel actually began. He set the dish in front of her and told her to eat. Even though her stomach was growling, she remembered that cats can get stomach aches from drinking human-made milk. But in the end, she decided to drink it anyway. To her surprise, the milk tasted amazing. And tossing aside all human dignity, she started drinking like there was no tomorrow. Grabbing a napkin, the prince said that everyone claimed cats were smart and cruel, but this one in front of him looked more like a pitiful little mess. As he wiped her off, he pointed out that she was so fragile, he could probably break her by accident. The kitten wondered if that was supposed to be some kind of insult. As he stared at her, Cillian questioned how something so tiny could possibly kill anyone. Nearly in tears, the protagonist thought, "That's exactly what I've been trying to tell you." Someone knocked on the door and called out to His Majesty, apologizing for the interruption. The prince hesitated for a second before the door opened. Then, he quickly grabbed the kitten and shoved her into his coat pocket. Stuffed into his jacket like that. She got that he had to act fast. But did he really need to be that rough? Ugh, the stupid prince. She heard someone ask if they had interrupted his meal. A young lady spoke to the prince, saying that since His Majesty had enjoyed the meal she prepared for him yesterday, she came to thank him in person. And so, the young woman with a jaw sharper than an isosceles triangle continued, saying she was worried about his lack of appetite, but happy to hear he'd eaten the meal she prepared. Listening from his pocket, the protagonist realized that a woman who insists on making meals reminded her of something from the novel. The young lady then asked the prince to enjoy the food again today, saying she really put in a lot of effort making it. Hearing that soft and delicate voice, the girl remembered there was only one person who would push so hard to feed Cillian. Someone who'd do anything to satisfy her hunger for power. The evil countess, Catherine Harmon Gisela. In the original story, she seduced Cillian's father, the emperor, and ended up sitting on the throne as the empress. Catherine asked the prince if he had lost his appetite again. This same woman, at only 20 years old, was gifted the entire state of Gisela by the emperor. The protagonist remembered how the main character had a hard time dealing with her because of her intelligence and influence. While the kitten got lost in her thoughts, Catherine kept talking, mentioning that today's meat was lamb seasoned with salt and pepper, served with a sauce made from premium wine from the Bordeaux region. That was only the beginning of her grand plan. After all, Gisela was using dark magic potions on the emperor. Trying to get Cillian to eat, she said it was important not to let the meat get cold, or it would lose its flavor and turn rubbery. She then asked him to at least take a bite, since she had worked so hard on it. Catherine had done the same to the prince's food. And little by little, in the story, Cillian would become poisoned by her potion, turning into a puppet she could control once he became emperor. She added that she felt bad about leaving him to eat alone, so she'd wait until he finished his meal before leaving. Annoyed, Cillian asked if he ate what she brought. Would she finally leave him alone and stop this nonsense? Hesitating, Catherine explained that His Majesty had ordered her to make sure Cillian was eating properly, so she was just following instructions. Realizing she was right, he sighed and gave in. Inside his pocket, the cat girl panicked, hoping he'd wait a second. Was he picking up the spoon now? She thought there was no way she could let the prince eat anything prepared by that woman. With no other choice, she went for her secret weapon, desperately scratching the prince's pocket. Cillian felt something moving inside his coat and got startled. The countess asked what was wrong. The prince told her to wait a moment and reached into his pocket, grabbing the kitten. But she was determined to stop him from eating and kept scratching, trying to warn him the food was bad. And even though, in her mind, she pictured his brain melting and his life getting wrecked, the only sound she managed to make was a tiny, pathetic meow. When he pulled his hand out of the pocket, there was a huge scratch across it. The prince said he'd had enough of all this. He pointed out that his father wasn't the type to care about his eating habits, and besides, he wasn't even hungry right now. Trying to fake concern, Catherine said he probably wasn't feeling well, so she'd let him rest in peace. After hearing the door close, Cillian turned toward his pocket. He quickly searched for the kitten with a serious look on his face. Now, sitting on the table, her head down, the prince asked if he could take a look at the scratches she gave him. The protagonist didn't know what to do. Just being a cat in this world was already weird enough. And now that she had scratched him during dinner, she was sure she wouldn't get away with it. She tried meowing in desperation, trying to explain herself. But in the end, she realized Cillian couldn't understand her. A super awkward silence followed. The prince stared while the kitten shook in fear. Almost crying, she thought to herself, "Yep, I'm definitely gonna die." Under his gaze, she completely froze. She wondered if maybe she should have just let him eat and planned an escape later. But shaking her head, she told herself no. That wouldn't sit right with her conscience. There was no way she'd feel okay letting someone become addicted to something as awful as that cursed drug. If she wanted to stop that from happening, she couldn't let him eat anything made by Countess Gisela ever again. Then the prince gently patted her on the head and asked if she'd gotten scared being inside his pocket, saying that if he was going to keep her outside from now on, she better not scratch him like that again. The protagonist felt relief wash over her. Despite his terrifying expression, the prince was letting her off with just a warning, basically like getting a yellow card. Grabbing his fork, Cillian said he was going to return to his meal. Panicking, the kitten tried to think of some way to stop him. Finally, she had an idea. Meowing loudly, she started clawing at the tablecloth, leaving the prince confused about what she was doing. Realizing she'd just made things even weirder and only made Cillian uncomfortable, she wondered what to do next. In the end, she decided to risk everything and tried using the universal language of all animals, body language. She started gesturing, basically miming out the idea that if he ate the food, he'd die. Confused, the prince asked if the cat was trying to stop him from eating. Happy, the girl meowed affirmatively. Feeling like he was going insane listening to a cat, Cillian asked what was even the reason to avoid this food in particular. All he got back were more random meows. Giving up, he figured maybe the kitten had sensed something. And based on her gestures, if he ate it, he'd get sick and pass out, which honestly sounded like poison. The prince said that made absolutely no sense. I mean, how could a cat possibly know something like that? The girl thought, because I'm a human inside a cat's body. She wondered what would have happened if she really was just a regular cat in this world, and not someone who reincarnated. If she was just a cat, how exactly would she survive here? Despite that grim thought, she tried to stay hopeful. First of all, she was super close to the crown prince, so getting killed right now was unlikely. In a little fantasy of hers, she imagined a future by the prince's side, but also thought of ways she might turn back into a human. She decided to use the full charm of this tiny cat body she was reborn into. Cillian froze for a second, then smiled. The prince said, "This is kind of funny." And the kitten was stunned. He smiled. Then someone knocked on the door. They announced that a command from the emperor had arrived, asking for the prince's presence at the second library as soon as possible. Cillian's entire vibe shifted. That cheerful smile was instantly replaced by a cold, dark expression. With the lights off, the kitten laid on the prince's bed, waiting in silence. She thought the room was super boring, like it had no personality at all. But then again, Cillian spent most of his time at the academy, so it made sense that his room would be kinda lifeless. He barely stayed at the palace. Before he left, Cillian told her not to leave the room, that she could use whatever was inside to keep herself busy. But that was it. Now, in the present, she waited, feeling down, thinking the prince had rushed off to see the emperor and left her behind. A little while later, Cillian walked through the hallway and eventually returned to his room. Taking off his coat, his body revealed several scars. and then he went straight to the bath. With a blank, lifeless expression, he washed himself, his skin marked with blood, bruises, and fresh cuts. Drying his hair, he walked over to the bed and noticed the kitten was still there. Cillian praised her for staying quiet as he gently petted her. Lying down, he said he was going to sleep now, so she should make sure to stay on the bed and not fall off. But then the kitten noticed something strange. The prince's scent had changed. She could smell blood. She remembered from the original story that the emperor used to discipline him brutally since he was a child. That might have been why he was summoned earlier. The girl thought to herself, "Honestly, I always wondered why male leads in romance and fantasy stories were so stoic, probably just to make them look cooler." She used to think Cillian's past was a big cliché, but now that she was actually witnessing it firsthand, it felt way harder to accept. Brushing it off as just part of the plot felt wrong now, because it was happening right in front of her, and right now, the smell of blood and the cold air were painfully real. She walked up to his hand, wondering if there was anything she could do. She just wanted to help him somehow. Cillian shifted in his sleep, and suddenly woke up, thinking he had another nightmare. But then, something caught him off guard. Instead of the kitten sleeping next to him, he woke up to a full surprise. In his arms, lying in bed, was a silver-haired woman, completely naked. Shocked, the prince immediately sat up. He looked to the side and realized something was missing. The cat was gone, and in its place, now there was a woman lying on his bed. In his mind, he thought the kitten that was supposed to be there had just vanished. This had been his first time ever seeing a real cat, something he had only known from illustrations. Maybe killing it back then would have been the right choice. He remembered reaching for his sword, hesitating, but for some reason, he couldn't bring himself to do it. First off, how had a cat like that even existed if they were supposed to be extinct? And even more confusing, how had one ended up in the garden near the palace in this day and age? Second, he remembered that, even though she was an animal, when he had pet her, she clearly understood human language. And even looking so small and fragile, barely able to protect herself, the kitten still tried to stop the prince from eating the poisoned food. And on top of that, she'd waited quietly for him in his room, keeping him company until he fell asleep. So, this cat, no matter how dangerous these creatures were said to be, Cillian had realized it. This cat belonged to him. Standing there, staring at the woman in his bed, he thought that if this woman dared to lay a hand on what was his, whoever she was, Cillian wouldn't forgive her. Irritated, he shouted for the woman to wake up now, but only silence followed as she slept like a rock. Furious, Cillian reached for her, and as the prince, he ordered her to open her eyes this very second. The woman slowly blinked awake, still half asleep. Then a flash of light burst out, momentarily blinding him. In the next instant, the kitten was back in his bed, rolling around and meowing at him. He stood frozen, completely stunned by whatever the hell he'd just witnessed. The kitten, on the other hand, was just yawning cutely. The protagonist wondered why he was waking up a cat in the middle of the night. Seeing his expression, she realized the prince was actually pissed. In her mind, she wondered if she'd maybe kicked him in her sleep, or accidentally touched one of his injuries. The prince paused for a moment, then asked the kitten who she really was. She looked at him for a second. The girl thought, even if he asks that, I'm still just a cat. I can't do more than meow. There was no way to give him a real answer. Still in disbelief, he kept trying to form a sentence, but stopped and restarted multiple times. His brain clearly unable to make sense of what just happened. That just confused her even more. Then Cillian leaned in and asked if she was really a cat. She wondered if he had serious trust issues. And meowing in response, she mentally questioned if this was literally his first time seeing a cat. Feeling kinda bad for him, she realized, yeah, it really was. The kitten wondered if he was under the influence of the black magic potion. That stuff was supposed to build up in his body over time. Or maybe he was just delirious from stress and in some kind of sleep-talking trance. She remembered reading in the story about an antidote, but the only person who knew about it was Countess Gisela, and unfortunately, she took that info to the grave. So now the girl had absolutely no idea how to give the prince that antidote. Cillian said that if she revealed her identity now, he'd go easy on her punishment later. Hearing that, the girl went full cat mode, scratching behind her ear, licking her fur, acting like she was just grooming herself. She figured that'd be enough to convince him. He'd probably think she was cute or something. But instead, Cillian just looked at her, dead serious, and asked what the heck she was doing. Feeling that cold response, she realized her dignity was gone, and she hadn't even gotten anything out of it. Walking toward him, she thought if her kitten cuteness didn't work, maybe it was the potion messing with him after all. Climbing into his hand, she started licking him, hoping maybe it'd help purify the black magic inside him. Cillian hesitated for a moment, then sighed and gave up. Throwing himself back into bed, he figured there was no point interrogating her anymore. He wasn't going to get any answers either way. Realizing he had given up, the girl plopped down on the bed too and figured she might as well go back to sleep. The prince tucked her in and gave her a few gentle pats. She wondered why he was wrapping her so tightly in the blanket, but then shrugged it off. Feeling sleepy again, she drifted off. A few seconds later, the same flash of light appeared again. Startled, the prince stared in shock. What the hell was happening? Right in front of his eyes, the kitten was transforming into a woman again. Cillian thought about how cats were believed to be entities that would one day destroy the Huppert Empire if left unchecked. Because of that belief, the Empire had used countless resources to wipe them out completely. That's what he had been taught all his life. But right now, what he was seeing went beyond anything he could have imagined, because the so-called cat sleeping in front of him was nothing more than a beautiful woman. He was torn, because even though a cat clearly still existed, the Empire was still standing, which completely contradicted everything he had been taught. And to make things even more confusing, there was nothing in any of the Empire's records about cats turning into humans. There had to be something off about this whole ancient prophecy, something that had fooled the entire Empire. In the end, the prince knew one thing for sure. The Empire would be his, no matter what. So he wouldn't stop until he uncovered every hidden mystery in Huppert. Sitting deep in thought, with the woman still lying beside him, Cillian gently ran his hand through her hair. He thought, until that day comes, until the entire Empire belongs to him, he wouldn't let anyone find out about this cat or take it away from him. But more than that, embarrassed, sneaking glances at the sleeping girl, he thought they really needed to buy this woman some clothes. The next morning, with sunlight pouring in through the window, the kitten woke up. Now that she had truly become a cat, she thought she needed way more sleep than before. Looking around, she wondered where Cillian had gone. Then suddenly, she noticed something. There was a piece of fabric tied around her back leg, keeping her stuck in place. As she wondered what the heck that was, the prince approached holding a plate. He said he couldn't just let her wander off whenever she felt like it. Smiling, he walked closer with a dish of milk. Setting it in front of her, Cillian said she better eat while it was still warm, and not even think about going anywhere. Feeling a little down, she wondered how he could sound so cheerful while saying something that controlling. Sniffing the air, the kitten noticed the prince still smelled like blood. Looking concerned, she walked over to him, which confused him. She started tugging at the string on his shirt, and when she bit down and pulled, part of his outfit fell to the side, revealing his wounds. "Hey, what are you doing?" he asked, grabbing her gently. Seeing all the scars, the protagonist was shocked at how bad it was. The prince was known as the Empire's top martial arts and swordsmanship master, so seeing these brutal injuries, she wondered why he never fought back. It was strange that the Emperor, praised for his strength in the original story, was now the one violently abusing his own son during childhood. The girl thought, sure, Cillian was the tragic male lead, but that didn't mean he had to go through such a hostile and violent life. So finally, she walked up and meowed at him, then jumped onto him with her paws raised, looking a bit mad. Seeing this, the prince asked, "What are you doing now?" Then added, "Are you upset because I'm hurt? Is that what you're trying to say?" Looking at her, Cillian smiled. He said it was weird that she acted like a person and yet still thought she was a cat. As he said it, he kept petting her in his lap. In his mind, he wondered, was she trying to trick him? Or did she really not know what she was? He said they needed to head out now. They had something to buy, which left the kitten totally clueless. Later, inside the carriage, she looked out the window and felt alive for the first time in ages, finally seeing something other than the prince's room. She saw people walking around in their old-timey outfits, and it hit her. This really was the world of a novel. Suddenly, the prince pulled her back from the window, scolding her not to put her paws there. She reluctantly agreed with a small meow. The carriage stopped, and the coachman announced that they'd arrived at their destination. Two people greeted them, saying it was an honor to receive the prince, and proudly mentioned that this was the most popular clothing shop in all of Cloud City. Meanwhile, inside the prince's pocket, the kitten wondered why he'd bring her to a clothing shop. Did he need her for something? As they stepped inside, Cillian noticed some masks on the counter. He asked what they were for, and a woman explained they were accessories for the upcoming palace masquerade ball. They were still being made, which is why they hadn't been placed in the window display yet. The girl figured the prince must be getting ready for that ball. And maybe, just maybe, he wanted her opinion as a woman. Cillian said he'd walk around on his own for a bit to check everything out, and dismiss the staff. The attendant agreed and stepped away. Then the prince said the kitten could come out now. So she did. Immediately. She was startled by the luxury of the clothes all around her. Everything looked insanely expensive. Then the prince told her to pick something she liked. For a moment, she was just confused, but then it hit her. The young man went on, saying he didn't really know what women usually liked. Meanwhile, the kitten was panicking inside. They were standing in the pajamas section. Why on earth did he want to buy someone pajamas? Cillian said it was a gift, but that only left the protagonist even more confused. She wondered who this woman was that the prince might want to give a present to. Her thoughts wandered for a while, and she came to one horrifying conclusion. It might be Countess Gisela, the same one who had poisoned his food. She questioned if Cillian really wanted to give cute clothes like those to the Countess. And yeah, she admitted that Gisela was stunningly beautiful. Like the kind of beauty that could make anyone fall in love at first sight. Plus, they were only 3 years apart in age. But still, she thought they were supposed to be enemies. The woman had taken her mother's place in the palace, so there was no way they were ever on good terms. She wondered if maybe he had fallen for her just because of the meals she cooked. Totally horrified, the protagonist panicked at the thought. The prince had no idea what kind of poison that woman was feeding him. While she was spiraling, Cillian asked if this was enough, but the kitten started meowing like crazy again, trying once more to warn him that the Countess was using magical poison. But of course, he couldn't understand a thing. Cillian asked if she didn't want to buy them, saying they needed those clothes. She shook her head violently, but the prince just laughed, teasing her. What, are you jealous? You thought those were for someone else? In the end, she just meowed back. In his mind, the prince thought she really didn't know about her condition, that every time she fell asleep, she transformed into her human form. Smiling to himself, he figured it'd be better to keep that secret for now. Leaving the shop, they returned to the carriage. Seated inside, Cillian gave the signal for them to depart. Inside his pocket, the protagonist wondered what that had all been about. As Cillian smiled and hummed to himself, it really felt like he was hiding something from her. Suspicious, the kitten decided she couldn't let her guard down. Who knew what was going on inside that prince's head? Then he asked if she wanted some snacks. Her heart instantly melted. Placing a little treat on the cushion with a napkin, Cillian watched as the kitten happily munched away. Noticing he was staring, she meowed and wondered if he wanted a bite, or maybe she'd eaten too much. Patting her head, the prince replied he didn't like sweets and told her to finish it. While enjoying the affection, the protagonist suddenly realized something. She needed to stay sharp. At this rate, she'd start acting like a real cat, in both behavior and mindset. Looking out the window, she wondered where they were going. It didn't look like they were headed back to the palace. Then, with a more serious tone, Cillian told her to listen. He said that once they arrived at their destination, they were going to check something out. But no matter what happened, she wouldn't get hurt. So, she shouldn't be scared. Her tail fluffed up immediately. That sounded exactly like something someone would say right before doing something sketchy. But then the prince gently stroked her back, and she melted all over again. She thought maybe she was getting too comfortable in his lap. Maybe it was the food. Maybe it was the constant affection. Either way, she was getting sleepy. As she drifted off, a flash of light appeared. And just like before, the woman from earlier was now resting in the prince's lap. This time, she was covered with a sheet, one the prince had thankfully prepared ahead of time. Cillian sighed in relief, glad he had grabbed a blanket just in case. He closed the carriage window. He thought about how, ever since the time of the old emperor, magic had been condemned as a dark force and strictly limited. Because of that, sorcerers themselves had faced harsh persecution. So he figured he had to cover up this bizarre little phenomenon. This cat, or woman, or whatever she was. The truth was, Cillian still didn't know what to call her. She slept peacefully in his lap as he gently tightened the blanket around her. He thought they needed to meet with the mages in person. The carriage moved toward a distant castle. She slowly started to wake up. The kitten wondered where they were, then heard a voice announcing, "Master of Winston has arrived to greet you." She figured, based on the fact she was once again tucked into the prince's pocket, that she wouldn't really know where they were. But if Cillian had hidden her again, they had definitely reached their destination. Turns out they were in the Winston region, in the territory of Duke Delson. A hooded man walked alongside the prince as they strolled through a lush garden, with flowers blooming, decorations all around, and banners flying. Once inside the castle, a white-haired man introduced himself to the prince. He said, "I am Valan Delson." The old man greeted Cillian, calling him Your Highness, the son of the Huppert Empire. He said he never imagined he'd get to meet him in person, to which the prince simply nodded. The group of men knelt before him, honoring the future emperor, and asked him to take a seat. A young man named Herod Deucin pulled back his hood and asked, "Forgive me for asking, but may I know why your majesty is here?" Cillian looked at him and asked if he really wanted to know. Herod quickly answered yes. Being blunt, Herod explained that sorcerers were heavily marginalized in this region, all because the royal family had labeled them as users of dark forces. So he couldn't exactly connect the dots. He could only guess why someone from the palace, the crown prince no less, would show up in a place like this. With clear resentment in his voice, Herod admitted the whole situation was pretty surprising. Smiling, the prince said he sounded a bit bitter. But Valon quickly cut in, telling the boy, Herod, to shut his mouth, reminding him they were in the presence of His Highness. He apologized to the prince, saying his son was still immature and acted disrespectfully, and begged for mercy. Cillian said it didn't matter. Of course, the boy would have resentment toward the palace, but the reason he came here unannounced was simple. He needed confirmation about something. Reaching into his pocket, Cillian pulled out the kitten and placed her on the table. Silence filled the room. Everyone stared, completely shocked to see a cat right in front of them. They all asked, stunned, "Is that really a cat? Why would you bring something so grotesque here?" Cillian said he didn't care if magic was currently labeled as a dark force by the palace. He would use every tool at his disposal. With a serious expression, he told the sorcerers he wanted them to uncover the curse tied to this cat. That sentence alone shocked the protagonist. She thought, so this guy's name is Herod Deucin. She vaguely remembered him. In the original story, this young and brilliant sorcerer would later lead a rebellion against the prince, who by then was the emperor. In the final arc of the novel, the fact that they were meeting him even before Cillian's coronation meant, yeah, the story was definitely going off track now. Everyone still sat around the table, with the prince at the head, staring at the white kitten in front of him. Meanwhile, the girl thought that from now on, she probably wouldn't be able to predict the future properly anymore. Suddenly, Herod snapped, screaming, asking why the hell the prince would bring a cursed creature to this place. Reaching for his sword, Herod shouted that if the palace didn't want blood on its hands, and brought this cat here expecting the sorcerers to handle it, then he'd kill it himself without hesitation. The kitten panicked, but just as Herod's blade neared, a loud crack rang out through the room. Cillian stood there with his sword already drawn, the kitten safe in his other arm, and asked, "Who gave you permission to draw your dagger?" Herod's weapon was now shattered on the floor, broken into pieces. His father cried out in shock, but Cillian turned to him and coldly said, "You should be more worried about the cat than your son." Herod barked back, saying the prince was surrounded by sorcerers now, and if he thought there wouldn't be consequences for drawing a sword on him, he was sorely mistaken. But he was cut off by his own father, who ordered him to bite his tongue in the presence of His Highness. Bowing his head, the man begged forgiveness again, saying his son was too young to understand the gravity of the situation, and asked the prince to lower his sword. Cillian did, but then added, "This cat belongs to me, and anyone who comes near what's mine will be punished." Still, he said he'd let it go this time. Shaken, Valon asked, "Do you really mean to say, the cat is yours?" He pointed out that according to prophecy, cats were destined to bring about the fall of the empire. So hearing that from the heir to the throne was a bit much. Meanwhile, the kitten sat quietly on the table, head down. Cillian said he didn't like beating around the bush, so he'd get straight to the point. Drawing magical runes around him, fire started flickering in the air. Then he asked, "Should I continue at the speed my fire spreads?" Flames and heat began to fill the room. The sorcerers were clearly rattled. The prince was using his aura. The fire crackled and curled around him, and even the kitten was stunned. This was Cillian's aura, the hidden power of the prince. Aura was a type of energy only those who had reached an elite level in swordsmanship could master. Still, in this world, aura was considered a rare and special force, one that resembled magic more than anything else. That's why aura was avoided and rarely seen outside the battlefield. It was considered something incredibly dangerous. And on top of that, in a place full of sorcerers, people historically viewed as enemies of the royal family, the prince using aura openly could reveal a major secret and put him in serious danger. Even so, Cillian wasn't holding back. He was blatantly showing off his aura, which made the protagonist wonder, why was he taking this so far? Then the prince asked, "Now that you've seen this, will you or won't you investigate the curse?" Valon bowed and agreed to follow the prince's command, asking him to withdraw his aura. As the man approached the kitten, the girl wondered what was going on. This whole situation had unfolded so differently from the original story. Feeling uneasy, she questioned how she was supposed to survive in this world if she couldn't rely on her knowledge of the plot anymore. As he began inspecting her with magic, Valon suddenly froze, shocked by the energy he was sensing. Stunned, he said he couldn't believe it. Cillian asked if he was done. The man nodded, explaining that the power was so immense no one could undo it. It wasn't a curse at all. There was a divine blessing on this cat. The god of this world was protecting her. That got the protagonist curious. Valon went on, explaining that while everyone had believed the prophecy claimed cats were evil entities doomed to die, this one was surrounded by divine protection. And as unbelievable as it sounded, he believed, based on his humble analysis, that this cat and all her ancestors had been divinely protected for generations. Cillian rested his hand on his chin, thinking, so, this cat didn't just randomly fall from the sky that day. Valon explained that he felt a strong connection to an ancient protective force. He believed the cat's parents probably had that same blessing, which could mean they were still alive. That would explain how she'd survived for so long, and how she could still exist even though cats were considered extinct. The protagonist leaned forward slightly, curious now about this cat's parents in this world. Then Valon turned to his son and asked him to come closer. He wanted him to scan the cat's memories. Herod scoffed, saying he hadn't learned such a complex spell just to use it on a mere animal. That earned him a quick scolding from his father, who reminded him that he'd taught him all living beings are equal. Grumbling, Herod gave in and apologized to the prince for his behavior. Then he hesitated, asking if he could dare to touch the paw of something that belonged to his highness. Cillian looked him straight in the eye and said, "I'll allow it, but only the paw." As Herod reached forward, a flash of light burst out. Closing his eyes, he focused. But then, he frowned and asked aloud, "What the hell is this?" He was seeing the grand palace garden, the majestic castle, familiar scenery, and behind it all was Cillian, right at the beginning of the kitten's memories. Opening his eyes, Herod said this was really strange. There was nothing else, just the castle and the prince. Cillian asked, "What do you mean nothing else?" Herod replied, "I mean exactly that. The only human in the cat's memories was Cillian." He added, "Every single memory is tied to his highness." Cillian asked what that meant. The sorcerer explained that it looked like the kitten had lost all of her past memories. The prince was deeply intrigued. Why was he the only person she remembered? He then asked if they had learned anything else about the divine blessing, but the sorcerers told him it was impossible to investigate any further using magic. The divine power inside the cat was blocking any deep magical probing. They'd need to use less conventional methods for further research. Cillian nodded and said he'd start investigating curses that went beyond the known prophecy. Valon explained that he believed the original text of the prophecy had been destroyed long ago, but the prince insisted. If they worked together, they could uncover something. Everyone sat around the table. Herod hesitated, then admitted, "I think I get it now. The real reason your highness came here wasn't just about the curse." Cillian let out a sigh and agreed. As crown prince, he was here to make an official proposal. He placed a letter with the imperial seal on the table. Opening it, they saw it was a contract. Cillian asked them to review it carefully. Shocked, the sorcerers recognized what it was. They saw the sun emblem of the empire stamped on it. They asked why he had chosen them. Cillian answered plainly, "The Delsons were the only mage family that never bowed to the royal family, not even after centuries." He continued, "And I need people who don't lower their heads so easily to the crown. And that's why he needed to make them an offer that would actually benefit them." Valon asked what kind of offer that would be, and while the protagonist kept her eyes on him, the prince responded that he intended to reopen the academy. That line alone instantly shocked both mages, clearly catching them off guard. Cillian explained that the former emperor had shut down the academy to eliminate any potential opposition coming from the mage faction, and regardless of that, reviving it now seemed like the best way to form an alliance with the Count's order. The mage warned that doing so might endanger the prince, but Cillian quickly replied that he would handle everything himself, and all he asked was for the man to focus on training new mages. He went on to say that, as everyone probably already knew, the empire was barely holding itself together by the end, and now it seemed like there were secrets hiding in the shadows. Secrets that had something to do with that cat. Cillian knew that fixing everything would be difficult, but his mind was already made up. He declared that if they placed their trust in him, he would personally bring back the glory and success that mages once held. Valon then pointed out that, for a mage, a contract meant absolute surrender of their life and power to their master. After all, mages could only unleash their most powerful magic once bonded, but that came at the cost of losing their sense of self, making them completely dependent on whoever they served. Cillian answered honestly that he wasn't going to pretend this was about some grand ambition, like building an empire. He simply wanted to uncover the truth, because what they had seen so far completely contradicted the prophecy, and that alone made him curious about the secrets behind all of it. The sorcerer admitted that this definitely wasn't something to take lightly, but after exchanging looks with his son, both gave a nod. Then Valon declared, loud and clear, that he, Valan Delson, would dedicate his life to whatever His Highness commanded. As soon as the words were spoken, magical chains shot out from the paper, sealing the contract. From that moment forward, Cillian was officially his master. After 500 years, they were finally welcoming a new master into their household. The prince smiled and commented on how Valan had just called him master, then turned to Herod and said he had a first task for him, something the young mage quickly agreed to, full of anticipation. But what Cillian pulled out next caught everyone off guard. He took a pair of pajamas from his bag, leaving the two mages in front of him utterly confused. Herod asked what those were for, and the prince explained that he wanted him to enchant the clothes so they'd automatically adjust to fit whoever wore them. Herod muttered, trying to understand why on earth anyone would need that kind of enchantment, but as soon as he saw Cillian's serious face staring him down, he shut up and agreed, visibly nervous. He then stepped into a magic circle drawn on the ground and started casting. After some time, he finally announced that the spell was ready. The clothes would now perfectly fit whoever wore them, regardless of who it was. The prince complimented his work, said that was all for today, and announced it was time to leave. Back at the Imperial Palace in Cillian's room, he called the cat over and held up the pajamas, asking her to put them on. She stared at him, completely confused. Weirded out, the protagonist thought to herself, why on earth would a cat need human pajamas to sleep in? That made no sense at all. Shaking her head, she told herself there was no way she was doing that. It looked incredibly uncomfortable. She loved curling up in those soft, fresh sheets without anything on top, and she couldn't believe the prince expected her to give that up. Being stuck in this world inside a cat's body was already depressing enough. No way she'd give up one of the only perks of being a cat, which was sleeping naked without judgment. In her head, she was passionately protesting for animal rights and the freedom to sleep however the hell she wanted. But all Cillian saw was her meowing over and over. The prince tilted his head and asked if she really hated it that much, and she let out an annoyed, affirmative meow. Then he asked if she would ever wear them at all, and she gave the same answer, still a very clear no. Smirking, he warned her not to regret it later, which confused her, but she didn't think much of it. Later that night, Cillian gently laid a blanket over the silver-haired girl, smiling as he told her, I warned you to put something on. The next day, still in the castle, spring was beginning to bloom. That meant Cillian had officially turned 19, and by now, according to the original storyline, he should have already ingested a dangerously high amount of Countess Gisella's black magic potion. Following the plot, around this time he should have started feeling severe exhaustion, overwhelming pain, and begun developing a deeply ominous aura around him. But strangely, the protagonist couldn't help wondering, why did he look so happy and healthy? Meanwhile, Cillian sat casually sipping his tea. She questioned whether he might have some kind of secret super regeneration ability she hadn't heard about before, because honestly, he looked great. Placing a small dish of milk on the table, Cillian told her to finish drinking it, and she meowed her agreement. Suddenly, a tapping sound hit the window, drawing her attention. She looked up and saw a large bird. It was a white eagle with something tied to its leg. Cillian acted like nothing had happened, saying casually that something had just arrived. The protagonist hesitated, wondering if maybe Cillian actually knew the eagle. She questioned if things like that were supposed to be normal in fantasy worlds. Opening the window, the bird flew in, and Cillian took what was tied to its leg. It turned out to be a letter, which he immediately began reading. Letting out a sigh, the prince said, today really wasn't his lucky day, but at least he had received a letter saying she wouldn't be able to see him. He figured that was better than being left in the dark without an answer. Talking to the bird, Cillian said it must be tired and should have some water. The kitten questioned whether eagles were always this obedient. The bird looked directly at her, and she froze, a little freaked out. Moments later, the eagle took off into the sky. Cillian said its name was Mikio, and that his mother had given it to him after taming it herself. He also added that the reply needed to be sent back by the end of the day. Now fully alert, the kitten thought that apparently this eagle was the only reliable way to send letters around here. Petting the top of her head, the prince explained he was going to visit His Majesty the Emperor, and that she'd be fine as long as she didn't leave the room, something she agreed to. As he walked toward the Emperor's chambers, Cillian recalled the letter he had just read. In it, someone referred to him as their dear son and apologized for canceling their meeting so abruptly. The person explained they had to travel to the region of Tanessa for rehabilitation, but insisted it wasn't anything serious. They called him the son of Rupert, telling him not to worry about his mother and to focus solely on his responsibilities and duties as the future ruler. The letter ended with a prayer to the sun and a signature. Elise, Cillian's mother. Outside, the sound of a weapon startled the birds. Near a fallen, bloody lion, several guards stood by. One of them commented that the beast hadn't reacted when whipped, but finally collapsed after being shot. Another man said this was an impressive tribute sent from the continent of Labar. That man was none other than Adolf Reinhardt, Emperor of the Huppert Empire. He casually remarked that it was pretty fun to toy with prey like that. Sitting beside Cillian, he began sipping from his teacup. The prince said he had lost his appetite, and that was enough for today. The animal should be taken to rest in the plains. The guards agreed and began dragging the crate containing the lion's body. A guard then approached and greeted them, introducing himself as the chief of staff, Lennon Macmillan, apologizing for interrupting their leisure time. But he insisted he had an important message for His Majesty and needed to request an audience. The emperor allowed it, and the man leaned in to whisper something in his ear. Turning abruptly, the emperor angrily said that the sorcerers he found so disgusting were now showing up everywhere, and he demanded an explanation. As Cillian calmly sipped his tea, he thought to himself that the palace had finally noticed the mage's movements. He also reflected on Lennon Macmillan, a vile, untrustworthy man who secretly worked for Countess Gisela despite his position as chief of staff. Cillian wondered if maybe he'd stirred things up a bit too much. But with a smile, the prince casually said he was the one who summoned the mages. That made Lennon freeze in complete shock. He clearly hadn't expected that answer. The man shouted, demanding to know what in the world the prince was thinking. Summoning mages like that. Cillian calmly replied that he believed it was necessary to keep them close and observe them. Lennon asked what he meant by observe, and Cillian simply said that's exactly what he meant. He explained that aside from the nobles, most citizens relied on mages whenever they were struck with illness or smaller problems. Because of that trust, he wanted to use the mages, those already trusted by the people, to make the palace appear stronger and more loyal in the eyes of the commoners. And he added that he was doing all of this for his father, the emperor, although that last part was probably a lie. Laughing, the emperor said the boy was right. Adolf agreed that Cillian was doing a fine job supporting his father, finding it absolutely admirable, and he laughed even harder. Then he turned to the chief of staff and asked if he agreed. Clearly terrified, Lennon nodded nervously and said that the love between His Majesty and the prince was deep and sincere. While the emperor kept laughing, footsteps echoed from the side. A woman approached, asking if there weren't too many guests around today. It was none other than Countess Gisela. Upon arriving, she told the chief to leave, saying she had just come for a pleasant cup of tea, but it was way too loud with so many people around. Nervously, the man agreed and began stepping away. And in Cillian's mind, all he thought was that the guy was nothing more than a pathetic loser. The emperor then asked what brought her there, since he thought the countess would be busy organizing the masquerade ball. The woman explained that she'd heard a rare black lion was being shown at the greenhouse, so she came to see it. Then she looked around and asked where the lion was. The prince replied that it had been sent to the plains and she was free to go visit it there if she wanted. Either way, the emperor asked how the preparations for the masquerade were going, and the countess replied that she was doing her best. She said that if only Her Majesty the Empress were still around, she could have taken care of it herself. That comment clearly annoyed the prince, but the emperor just laughed, saying what good was someone who was more focused on her rehab than her royal duties. He added that Catherine would be enough on her own. The woman laughed and said he was as heartless as ever. Then she turned to the prince and asked if he thought the same, looking for his opinion. Cillian replied that regardless, he had no doubt the countess would do a great job. But inside he was thinking about how utterly irritating everyone in that palace was. He wondered if he should just kill them all, but quickly shook off the idea. It was still too early. Killing them now would be way too kind. Instead, he'd slowly choke the life out of them, until they begged him to end it. Back in the prince's room, the protagonist noticed someone entering. The door had opened, and she wondered if Cillian was already back. She then started hearing some coughing sounds and got up to see what was happening. She saw that Cillian seemed to be feeling sick. She wondered if something had happened during the tea gathering, or if Countess Gisela had poisoned the food again. Black magic potion side effects included pain and vomiting, and that food could have easily been laced. She paused for a second, remembering that in the original story, Cillian began showing signs of addiction to black magic potions right around when he turned 19. And nervously she realized, that's exactly how old he was now. As she watched, the prince started undressing. She thought to herself this was the point in the story where he should be experiencing his worst pain, the kind of pain that would drive him to kill his own father and take the throne. He wandered around the room silently, ignoring her, with a blank look on his face, then collapsed onto the couch nearby. The protagonist felt sad. It wasn't fair. He was still so young, and yet he had to bear all this pain with no one around to even notice. It wasn't that he was great at hiding it. It's just that no one was close enough to him to care. Nobody at the palace protected him. All this time, Cillian had been protecting her while she was vulnerable, but he was only human. He couldn't carry everything alone, so she decided to do whatever she could to help. She grabbed the little dress Cillian had bought for her, climbed up using a pillow as a step, and dropped the clothes onto his sweaty head. First, she needed to bring his fever down. She emptied a nearby plate of milk and messed up some clothes. By the end of it all, she was totally exhausted, but she'd finally managed to help, and the fever was going down. She thought to herself how much she wanted to sleep in the big bed again, but realized she'd accidentally knocked down the pillows Cillian had stacked so she could climb up. With no way to reach the bed and not many other options left, she slipped into the enchanted outfit they'd made earlier with the mages. Feeling drowsy, she chuckled to herself. Now she was a cat in a dress. If anyone saw her like that, they'd probably laugh their heads off. She kept thinking about Cillian, wondering if this counted as a reward for sparing her life. Then, a flash of light filled the room. The next day, with the sun rising, Cillian woke up and noticed something on his head. Grabbing it, he realized it was a tiny dress, damp with sweat and water. Standing up, he wondered could it really be what he thought? Had the kitten actually taken care of him while he was passed out? Turning to the side, he saw the silver-haired girl, wearing pajamas and sleeping on the floor. Smiling, he figured she must have looked after him until she passed out herself. Kneeling down beside her, he quietly said that apparently she was the only one who supported him in this hellhole. Meanwhile, the girl began to mumble in her sleep. Cradling her in his arms, Cillian said she'd catch a cold if she kept sleeping on the floor, and that would force him to take care of her next. He picked her up and placed her gently in bed, then lay down beside her in the end. Brushing her hair, he asked softly if he should reward her for being such a good girl. Then he said a name, Renette, meaning Little Queen. Since, at least inside that room, she acted like a queen giving him orders, that's why the prince decided to give her that name. Little by little, the protagonist began to wake up. Right after that, the prince pinched her nose. Still groggy, she wondered if she was in the bed and how long she'd been asleep. Next to her, the prince asked how she slept, calling her Renette at the end. A bit unsure, she meowed at him, and the young man said that would be her name from now on. She actually got a little excited about it. After all, in this world, she hadn't been given a name yet, and the name Cillian had chosen for her was Renette. She suddenly stood up and meowed desperately, trying to ask if he was okay. And somehow he managed to understand her thoughts, replying that he was fine thanks to a certain cat who'd taken care of him. So, as a thank you, he'd given her a name. Putting her paw on her forehead, the protagonist thought she was happy to hear that. Then the prince said that to truly show his gratitude, he wanted to tell her something, which left her totally confused. He said that, to tell the truth, she actually turned into a human while she was sleeping. Shocked, the protagonist was completely speechless. Then he added that in that state, she was also naked. Silence hung in the air as she stared at him, the word naked echoing through her mind. She completely freaked out and started trembling, meowing like crazy. And then finally, the tension snapped. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the room, followed by a loud, screeching meow. Still in the room, Cillian called out to her, but she just turned her back and flicked her tail angrily. The prince asked if she was never going to look at him again, and in her mind, she thought, obviously not. He had seen her completely naked, and that upset her a lot. Based on how he described her, she found the whole thing deeply embarrassing. He sighed and reached out his hand toward her, saying he wanted to explain why he hadn't told her before, but all he got in return was a scratch on his hand. He was caught off guard. The protagonist realized she'd messed up. That was just a reflex. She didn't mean to hurt him. He grabbed his coat and said she should rest and try to feel better. He was heading out to work. The cat got a little anxious, wondering if Cillian was upset about the scratch. Looking at his hand, Cillian thought that, even with his guard up, the most she could do was leave a small mark on his skin. He slid a ring onto his finger and finished getting dressed. The prince said he was heading out and told her to behave and stay quiet. Flicking her tail on the carpet, the protagonist felt a bit restless, wondering when he'd come back. She thought that what just happened was her fault, and she really wanted to apologize when he returned. Suddenly, she heard whispers coming from the door. Then a voice said they needed to find anything that could cause problems. She froze for a second, and the door opened. Terrified, she realized someone was entering the prince's room at that hour without even knocking. Some maids came in, and a woman pointed out that they didn't have much time. Judging by the prince's personality, he wouldn't talk to the Laverne embassy for very long. That woman turned out to be none other than Countess Catherine Harmon Gazella. The protagonist thought, sure, she knew the emperor favored her, but even so, she definitely shouldn't be allowed to enter the prince's room and search for things whenever she felt like it. In the end, the cat hid under the prince's bed. The woman said she'd heard he visited a boutique, so there had to be something related to a woman in there, and they needed to find it. The protagonist wondered what they meant, but then remembered It was the clothing store where they bought the pajamas. The women following the Countess seemed a bit hesitant. One of them approached, apologizing and asking the Countess why it was even her concern if His Majesty was seeing a woman. She was worried it might backfire if they spoke so openly about it. The Countess turned to her and addressed her by name, Lady Anaros, and asked who had given her permission to even think. The woman stood there in shock like a statue. But the Countess went on, saying all she needed to do was follow orders. Pressing her fan to the woman's chin, she said she shouldn't waste her time or go against her commands. The woman apologized again, and the Countess resumed her mission. Then she asked if the woman really believed the prince was dating a noble. The Countess was sure that whoever the crown prince was seeing wasn't from a rich family. After all, if she were an aristocrat, they would have seen her around the palace already. But he met her at a clothing shop, which meant her background didn't allow them to be seen in public together. So Catherine ordered that anything remotely suspicious be brought to her. The women agreed, while the protagonist thought she'd be totally screwed if they found her. They searched for a while, but in the end, the maids reported that they hadn't found anything unusual. That made the Countess furious. She called them useless and cursed them out for not inspecting the room properly. While Gisela ranted about how the woman might as well go blind with such useless eyes, a noise caught their attention. A young maid entered the room and apologized, saying she thought no one was there since the prince was in a meeting with the ambassador. The Countess gave a smug look and asked who she was, if she was the prince's assistant, or maybe sent by him to secretly spy on the Countess. Stammering slightly, the maid said it wasn't anything like that. She'd just come to clean His Highness's room. Trying to give her a lesson, Gisela asked if she thought it was okay to just walk into the prince's room without permission, even just to clean. Almost in tears, the maid explained that the prince told her she could clean whenever the door was left open. But the Countess still didn't believe her and asked if she should rip her tongue out so she'd tell the truth. Meanwhile, the maid just kept trembling with her head bowed. Lady Anaros leaned in and whispered to the Countess that the time had come and the prince would be back soon. The Countess said they should leave now. But on her way out, she told the young maid she'd remember her face. With a loud bang, the door slammed shut. The protagonist wondered if they had all already left. But the white-haired maid was still in the room. She slowly approached the bed, step by step. And as she crouched down, the protagonist panicked, afraid of being found and wondering where the woman had even come from. Then suddenly, the maid deliberately looked under the bed, like she knew something was there. Renette trembled, wondering if she'd been spotted. The maid reached under the bed and started feeling around. Renette tried to stay as still and quiet as possible, terrified of being discovered. She wondered if the woman knew there was a cat under the bed, but that didn't make sense. They hadn't even made eye contact. Renette started to suspect this girl wasn't here to clean anything, realizing the maid's hand was just inches away from touching her, and that she was starting to breathe heavily from the effort. Just as they were about to make contact, the prince walked into the room. Seeing everything, he asked the maid what she was doing. Both of them turned toward him, surprised by his sudden arrival. Annoyed, Cillian said he was sure he had closed the door when he left. Lowering her head, the maid replied that the door was already open when she entered. The prince said that was enough and told her to leave immediately. The maid apologized to His Highness and exited. After shutting the door, Cillian quickly turned and called out for Renette. The cat immediately crawled out from under the bed. With a sad little look, she meowed at the prince. Cillian scooped her up in his hands and asked if she was okay or if she'd gotten hurt. Clearly pissed, he pointed out that he'd double-checked the lock before leaving. So he was sure Countess Gisela had opened it. Startled, the cat wondered how he knew that. Sighing, the prince said he'd run into her on the way, and she had looked paler than ever. Renette noticed his hand, still marked from the scratch earlier. She started gently licking the spot. Even after she hurt him, Cillian was still protecting her. Suddenly, the prince's ring began to glow. Seeing this, he said someone was contacting him. Looking into Renette's eyes, he asked if she wanted to learn more about herself. With wide eyes, the protagonist thought about that, while the prince smiled, waiting for her answer. Outside, the young maid started glancing around. Something felt off. She wondered if this garden had always been in the palace, and why it was so eerily quiet. It all seemed strange, like it wasn't the real world. Behind her, a male voice called out. It was Valon Deucin, asking how she'd gotten in there. The maid turned, startled. The man explained he had created that space using magic, and only he and his master could enter it. Valon said it was obvious the girl had been looking for something. The maid quickly tried to cover it up, saying it wasn't true. She just got lost and ended up there. The Duke didn't buy it for a second and asked bluntly if she'd been looking for a cat. Her expression froze instantly. The girl immediately began to justify herself, saying she had no idea what that man was talking about. But the fact that she had started trembling gave away her lie. Valon warned her that it would be better to tell the truth. since his master didn't like wasting time with roundabout conversations. Behind her, arms crossed, Cillian was staring at her. She hesitated for a moment, then bowed her head and greeted the prince. Cillian immediately recognized her. She was the maid who had rummaged through his room earlier. The prince asked for her name. She replied that her name was Irina. He guessed she hadn't found what she was looking for in his room. The maid insisted again that she was only there to clean. Cillian took a breath and sharply said she was just wasting their time with another obvious lie. Getting close to her face, he whispered angrily, demanding she answer quickly. Who was she working for? Faced with a death stare that could win a staring contest against a basilisk, the maid started sweating. She kept swearing she wasn't a spy and couldn't tell them anything. The prince told her she clearly hadn't understood that this wasn't a polite request. It was an order. The woman screamed that she didn't work for anyone. Renette, watching, wondered what she should do. Cillian was getting more and more furious. The woman begged them to believe her, but her words fell on deaf ears. The protagonist realized she had to act, or the prince would kill this maid. Seeing that there was no use dragging this out, the prince began to draw his sword. Realizing what he was about to do, Renette couldn't let him become a heartless tyrant. At that exact moment, she jumped from his pocket and clumsily clung to the sword. Surprised, Cillian froze. Even Valan was speechless. Gripping the sheath, the cat felt proud that she had managed to stop him. When asked why she did that, the only thought in her mind was, because he was trying to kill someone. Duke Valan Dusin couldn't believe his eyes. His Highness had brought a cat with him? He asked what would have happened if she had been caught. The prince simply replied that he believed the party of interest should be present too. Irina froze in disbelief at what she was seeing. The cat looked at her, hesitant. She didn't seem like someone who was afraid of cats, even if this was possibly her first time seeing that particular animal. The girl suddenly ran toward the cat, trying to snatch her from the prince's hands. Valan barely had time to shout a warning. Seeing the maid's hands coming at her, Renette thought she was about to be kidnapped. But then, with tears streaming down her face, Irina cried out that she was alive, calling the cat, "My baby." In the past, the maid had left the cat in the garden, telling her that if anyone walked by, she should hide. And if someone tried to grab her, she should run. She asked her to be a good girl and behave until she came back from work. That night, after her shift, the girl returned. But the cat wasn't in the garden anymore. She panicked, since the cat used to run straight to her when called. She was consumed by fear and worry. She searched everywhere, but still, her baby was gone. Hearing all this, the prince finally understood what had happened when he found Renette and took her in. It now made sense that she had been in the garden. Tears were still rolling down Irina's cheeks. She had believed she'd lost her baby forever, but she never could have imagined that Renette had lost her memories and had been with Cillian all that time. The maid hugged the cat tightly, squeezing her so much it was hard to breathe. She was scared the baby must have been terrified from the memory loss. Irina was overwhelmed with joy that their lives had been spared. She didn't even know how to thank His Highness. Cillian said that since the girl was Renette's mother, that made her a cat too, which meant she could thank him by answering some questions. The maid agreed without hesitation. Meanwhile, Valan was confused by that logic, still trying to connect the dots between the girl and the cat. The prince asked if there were any other cats besides the two of them, but Irina said no, that wasn't the case. After the prophecy was announced, cats started being hunted. Even mages had come after them. At that time, all the other cats had been killed. Cillian asked if she meant the prophecy that said cats would bring about the end of the world. Irina explained that after one case claimed cats were killing children and sacrificing them to a demon, they were branded as demonic creatures. Hearing that, Renette hoped this was all just a story. But still, she felt a deep sadness and guilt. She didn't know why, but something about it felt familiar. This grief, this guilt. She couldn't tell who those feelings belonged to, but she felt them swelling in her chest. Turning his attention back to Renette, Cillian asked if she was okay, or if something was wrong. The maid then asked the prince if he had named the cat Renette himself. He quickly confirmed, but now that they had discovered the cat had a mother, he became quite curious. What was her real name? But Irina admitted she had never given her one. When asked why, she explained, while holding her daughter tightly, that it was because they had been cursed. Cillian was deeply surprised and asked her to tell him more. Irina said the primary effect of the curse was that they turned into cats, and on the night of the red moon, they would become pregnant and give birth to a child. That was the punishment they were forced to bear. Pressed further about the punishment, Irina admitted she didn't know all the details. Valan stepped in, explaining that the red moon only appeared once every 70 years. The last one had happened 18 years ago, in the year 511 of the imperial calendar. Irina confirmed that 10 months later, she gave birth to a child. and now she was 89 years old. The protagonist was completely shocked. How could she be that age and still look so young? But once the initial shock passed, it hit her. She wouldn't age either. And one day, she'd also become pregnant under the red moon. Irina explained that her child would reach full maturity in a year, which also meant she had just about that much time left on this earth. Their kind was born as human children and grew the same way. But once they reached the age of 20, they stopped aging and remained that way for the rest of their lives, until the moment they turned 90. Cillian now understood their life cycle, but he still didn't see why that meant Renette hadn't been named yet. Irina said something unexpected had happened. When Cillian asked what she meant, the maid explained, normally, they appeared human while awake and only turned into cats when they fell asleep. But this child had a different curse. Renette was completely stunned. She didn't understand why she was different from the others. Surprised, Cillian finally understood the problem, why her curse worked in reverse. Because of that, Irina had wanted to name her only after solving the issue, but she had found no answers, and couldn't bring herself to name her daughter just yet. Cillian said nothing like this had ever happened before, and the maid agreed. He asked if she had any leads or thoughts. Irina explained she hadn't found anything, but believed there might be one place where the information they needed was kept. The prince asked where. Trying to speak, it was obvious Irina was extremely nervous. After all, she had just revealed both her and her daughter's secret to the prince of the empire. Renette placed a paw on her hand, showing she trusted her and stood by her side. Holding her daughter's paw, Irina turned to His Highness and asked him to take her to the Imperial Archives. For a moment, Cillian didn't understand the request. Irina clarified that yes, she knew entry was forbidden, but it was the most likely place they could find even the smallest piece of information. Both were silent for a few seconds. Turning to Valan, Cillian asked if he could teleport them there, startling Irina. Valan replied that it was possible, but he was worried they'd be caught. Cillian promised he would handle that part himself. Smiling, Irina felt deeply grateful to His Highness, but the prince told her there was no reason to thank him. He was doing this to uncover the truth for himself. Still, he asked the maid what her plan was. She didn't understand what he meant. Cillian then brought up Renette. Now that the cat had reunited with her family, did this mean she would have to say goodbye to the prince? Irina said she had one request for His Highness. She wanted the cat to stay with Cillian until they reached the Imperial Archives. The prince asked why. She explained that as just a servant, it would be very hard for her to hide her baby, calling her by the name Renette as well. The woman was convinced her daughter would be safer with the prince, just as she had been all this time. Reaching out his hand, Cillian gently picked up the cat, promising to take care of her for the night. He then gave instructions. They would go to the Imperial Archives the following morning, asking Valan if it would be difficult. The mage said it really wasn't. Bowing, Irina said she had no idea how she could ever repay all the help she was receiving from the prince. Cillian, confused, asked why she was crying. Renette wondered, was he really okay with letting her go so easily? That night, after carefully scanning every corner of Cillian's room, the cat thought, this might be the last time I ever see this place. Or him. Hearing the click of a door, she turned around. When he stepped out of the shower, the young man noticed the cat was still awake and asked if she had been waiting for him. Seeing his bare torso beneath the robe, Renette immediately blushed. She quickly tried, with all her body language, to tell him to cover up. Cillian didn't quite get it, confused at first, then laughed as he watched her. Leaning closer, he smiled and asked if she wanted to sleep with him that night. Renette froze, not understanding his intentions. He laughed again and clarified, of course she could wear her pajamas, which only made her more embarrassed. That night, just like before, Renette lay beside the prince, resting on a pillow next to him. She couldn't sleep for a long time, her eyes fixed on him. Eventually, Cillian noticed and asked if she was asleep, startling her. In a panic, she pretended to be asleep, curling up and staying quiet. But the prince reminded her that she turned human when she slept, so it was pretty obvious she was still awake. Something that completely caught her off guard. How could she forget something so important? Cillian sighed softly, then admitted that ever since she started sharing his bed, his nightmares had stopped. Gently stroking her fur, he whispered that, even though it was a little late to say it, he was truly happy to have her. She gave him a soft kiss on the tip of his nose. She felt the same way, but since she couldn't speak, that kiss would have to be enough. As both of them enjoyed each other's quiet presence, she silently thanked him for staying by her side. In her human form, she was now sleeping in his arms, but even in her dreams, one thought lingered. She didn't want to part ways with him. The next morning, Cillian, now dressed in a more formal outfit, stood with his arms crossed, annoyed that Valan was late. The mage apologized, explaining he had to sneak past the guards, then asked if Cillian hadn't brought the cat with him. A little paw peeked out. Raynette waved at them. Valon questioned why hide her if no one else was around. Looking down, Cillian said it was just because she was shy. So shy she'd tremble from embarrassment even in his pocket. Her mind, however, was still stuck on last night, still trying to process what the hell had just happened. Cillian covered his face with his hand while she squirmed in his pocket. Getting the hint, he assured her that he wouldn't say anything to the others. Irina arrived last, apologizing for the delay. Finally, the group was complete and ready to go. Turning to them, Cillian warned, this wouldn't be an easy trip. And in the blink of an eye, they teleported to the Imperial Archives. Cillian was stunned by how weak the security was in a place that housed the Imperial family's secrets. Herod explained that there were a lot of magical blind spots and weaknesses in the palace's defenses. That comment made the prince uneasy, but he said it was something he'd make sure to fix once he became emperor. He ordered everyone to look for anything related to cats, and so they began their search. While digging through the shelves, Herod remarked that although the palace's defenses were weak, they'd done a pretty good job hiding documents. Cillian snapped back at him, irritated, telling him not to insult the Empire. When asked, Valon said he hadn't sensed any magical tomes so far, so their only option was to keep looking and try harder. Crawling out of Cillian's pocket, Raynette was stunned by the massive sea of books and shelves. She thought it would take forever to examine everything. Irina spotted her daughter and asked if she had found anything. Sadly, Raynette meowed a quiet, no. Irina clutched a heavy tome about prayers from the great empire of Huppert. Valon suddenly told them to wait. He could feel a strange energy radiating from the book. Cillian didn't think the contents seemed particularly special, but as he read further, he realized it might actually be a prophecy. It spoke of someone who had stolen precious souls, who would spend 8 days in darkness and welcome the 9th night. The maid suddenly gasped. This was the exact prophecy she'd heard years ago. Her mother once told her she was the 8th child, and if this was the prophecy she thought it was, then the 9th child was none other than her own little Raynette. The cat couldn't believe it. Was she really the 9th child of prophecy? She decided to double-check the text. Maybe she had missed something important. Suddenly, the book began to glow as a radiant beam of light burst out from it. When she touched it, Raynette heard a voice. As if being pulled into the book's very essence. The voice asked, "Can you hear me, child?" She was inside the book. Someone had sealed their power within it, hoping to tell their story to the child of the 9th night. Someday. If they were talking about the future, the cat figured, this was probably a message from the past. Turns out, Raynette's arrival in this world had been foretold. She was the one destined to save the Empire. Those words felt strange, though, since according to the prophecy, cats were supposed to be destroying the Empire, not saving it. Not to mention, her curse was different from all the other cats. But the voice said that was the proof. Raynette was the 9th child. In that strange book space, she was asked to find the true prophecy, the one that had been damaged. Floating through the void, she felt completely lost. She didn't know who was speaking or where she was supposed to look for this prophecy. The voice explained that Raynette was protected by divine blessing and had the power to fix everything. It wished for her to find the original manuscript, break the chains of her curse, and end the suffering. It also said, if she ever met her descendant, she had to help them see the future. And just like that, the voice bid her farewell and wished her luck. Multiple voices echoed faintly in the distance. Just static. Impossible to understand. But slowly, Raynette began to return to her senses. She woke up to the prince shouting her name, eyes still drowsy. He was overjoyed that she was okay. She had been unconscious for a long time. Valon chimed in, saying that both she and His Highness had blacked out at the same time. Now that she was awake, Cillian said it was time to explain everything. In the background, the Duke and his son whispered to each other. Herod said someone had poured their entire magical power into a book. Only high-ranking archpriests could ever dream of pulling that off. And judging by everything they were saying, the name started to sound familiar. Cillian and Raynette looked at each other, wide-eyed. Then the prince asked the big question, who could it be? Someone explained that the original scroll of the prophecy had been damaged a week after it was created. The priest who died protecting it was a man named Fabian Nellis. It would make sense then. He was likely the one who left that final message. Raynette thought that must have been the man who reached out to her inside the book. Cillian suddenly stood tall. He had made a decision. When asked, he declared it. They would find the descendant of Fabian Nellis, no matter where he was, no matter who he was. They'd find him, no matter what. A carriage rolled down the road. It had been 5 days since that declaration. Thanks to Valon, they had located the boy pretty quickly. They were almost there. Still, Raynette didn't look happy. From her expression, Cillian could tell something was bothering her, and he asked what it was. She was extremely uncomfortable. Cillian had put bunny ears on her, and apparently that was supposed to disguise her tail too. The prince didn't see a problem. She was a cat, and it was dangerous for her to be outside. So he said it made perfect sense for her to pretend to be his pet bunny. He asked her what she thought, but Raynette could only tremble in shame. This was, without a doubt, the most humiliating moment of her life. She tried to meow in protest, but that only made Cillian laugh harder. He thought she was absolutely hilarious. When they arrived at their destination, Cillian was taken aback. They said the descendant of Fabian was 16 years old, but the place reeked of alcohol, and rats were running around. Valon confirmed. This was the right spot. As soon as Herod opened the door, they saw someone tossing a boy into a corner. The boy yelled, demanding the money he was promised. His attacker just laughed and told him to get lost. Cillian was stunned. That boy? That was Fabian Nellis's descendant? Herod confirmed it. He was the only living one. His name was Sanua Nellis. Meanwhile, the boy and the drunk man kept yelling at each other. But just as the drunk was about to punch him, smack! A loud sound echoed through the room. Blinking, Sanua had no idea what just happened. The prince had stepped in, gripping the man's head as he held him down on the floor. He told the boy he'd give the drunk 100 gold coins. Then, looking down at the man, Cillian added, "If 10 coins gave you the right to punch someone, then for 100 I should be allowed to break your neck." He tossed the man aside and warned, if he ever hit anyone again, he'd be searching for his own head rolling on the floor. Later that day, they took Sanua out of that filthy place and got him a proper meal. The kid was clearly starving. Cillian told him to slow down, gently calling him Sanua Nellis. But the boy looked up, confused. "Who the heck is that? Just call me Jack, for God's sake." Cillian raised an eyebrow. "So that's the name you gave yourself?" "Yup," the boy replied. "Jack." From inside Cillian's pocket, Raynette peeked out, still wondering if this guy could really be the descendant of a legendary archmage. Once his stomach was full, Jack finally asked, "So, what do you all want with me anyway?" After all, they had helped him and even fed him, but Jack never made deals without giving something in return. That's why he told the prince he was at his disposal, as long as Cillian told him what he wanted. Still silent, Cillian gestured to Herod. Herod stepped forward and asked the boy if he knew anything about a child whose day and night were reversed. Jack just stared blankly, completely confused by the question. The room fell into awkward silence. They started asking if he had any family relic, some special story passed down from his parents. But Jack knew nothing. Looking defeated, Herod told His Highness that this guy clearly had no clue. Cillian rose from the table and said it was time to leave. He ordered Herod to erase Jack's memories and told Valon to go search for another descendant of Nellis. Jack was stunned. He asked what was going on. As they walked out, Cillian told him he'd make sure Jack got paid enough to live comfortably. After all, his family had made sacrifices for the Empire, even producing a great priest once. Jack snapped. He said he didn't want that kind of money. He repeated that he only accepted honest deals. And who the hell gave them the right to erase his memories anyway? From Cillian's pocket, Raynette asked if it was safe to assume that if this guy didn't inherit anything, then they had no leads left. Jack cut in, saying he never got anything from his family. Not even a name. He'd left all of that behind. That gave Raynette an idea. What if the thing passed down by Nellis wasn't a relic or a story? What if it was the family itself? Suddenly it clicked. She had a plan. With a swift leap, Raynette jumped out of Cillian's pocket. Jack screamed. "What the hell? Was that a bunny or a cat?" Tearing off the bunny ears mid-sprint, Raynette launched herself at the boy and bit him. Hard, right on the cheek. She needed his blood. The blood of the Nellas bloodline. Jack let out a scream loud enough to wake the whole neighborhood. Then, everything shifted. Raynette felt her perspective change. Silver strands of long hair slipped through her fingers. Jack looked up and froze, the bite mark still fresh on his cheek. In front of him wasn't a cat anymore. It was a girl. Both of them stood frozen, in total shock. Raynette was still on top of him. And right on cue, the overprotective prince swooped in. Cillian yanked Raynette away by the waist and told her not to get too close to that guy. He tossed his jacket over her, covering her body. Jack just kept shouting in disbelief. A cat turned into a person? This isn't real. How is everyone so calm? Raynette felt a bit spooked. This guy was way too loud and way too close. Herod stepped up behind Jack and silenced him. Valon turned to Raynette and asked how she even guessed that would work. Beaming, she explained, "There's one thing that can't be stolen, broken, or lost with time. People. The bloodline itself." Valon nodded, saying the high priest Nellis must have passed down the key through his distant descendant. Finally, Jack realized what had happened. The cat had turned human. thanks to him. He smugly demanded a proper reward for that. The mages immediately told him to shut up. Off to the side, Cillian quietly watched Renette in her human form. She turned to him and asked why Harid and Jack were in the other room. The prince said it was because of the noise they were making. Now it was just the two of them, sitting at a table with cups of tea. Cillian casually asked why she'd bitten Jack on the cheek. Scratching her own cheek, she replied that, well, it was just the first thing she saw at the time, referring to him as Your Highness. Cillian sipped his tea and asked why she was being so formal all of a sudden. Blushing, Renette admitted that in her human form, she felt she had to act according to her class, since he was the crown prince. Murmuring under his breath, Cillian was about to say something about class systems, but before he could respond, someone started yelling. They both jumped in surprise. Renette stood up, thinking the voice was loud enough to mean something was very wrong. She stepped barefoot across the floor, but before she could take another step, Cillian stopped her. He scooped her up into his arms. Flustered, she asked him to put her down. He gently told her to stay still, reminding her that she was barefoot. Now, why she couldn't walk barefoot and had to be carried by the prince, we may never know. A second later, Herod burst into the room with tears in his eyes, begging His Highness to save him. Jack said he didn't understand why the mage was making such a fuss over a simple rat. Herod cried that he'd rather dive into a pigsty than end up in the same place as that miserable man. Annoyed, Jack pointed out that Herod always talked like that whenever he got scared of a tiny rat. Suddenly, the rat started moving in sync. The boy shouted to forget the pigsty. He'd throw him into a rat hole instead. Renette wondered if Jack was actually making the rodents behave like that. The rats swarmed Harid, who collapsed in defeat as his father called out his name. The room was a complete mess, like a horde of rats had stormed through it. They said it took forever to chase them all out, but Jack added that the other guy was the one who started it. Renette thought that, if her hunch was right, then Sanua's descendant might actually have the ability to control animals. With that in mind, she suggested they take him with them. Touching his hand, she told him Swana had a special ability, prompting Jack to complain about being called that name again. Staring at them both, Cillian asked Renette if Swana could really control rats. Jack again asked them to please stop using that weird name. Renette asked if he knew about his family lineage. She explained that the Swanas had produced powerful priests for generations and had made great sacrifices for the Empire. She whispered to Jack that he had been born into that family. Jack replied that he wasn't the one who did any of that. Still, Renette suspected Jack might have even greater powers and asked if he wasn't at least curious to learn more about what he could do. Jack was even more surprised when he heard that he was the only one who could help her. She added that he could also help other people. Silence lingered for a moment. A little embarrassed, Jack simply asked that if he turned out to be useless, Renette wouldn't take back her words. Taking his hand, she nodded, thanked him, and said she wouldn't. Just as Jack was about to complain about being called Swana again, he noticed something. Renette's vision was starting to blur, like the ground was shaking. She saw Sanua's face getting bigger and bigger. Clinging to the boy's hand so she wouldn't fall, she wondered if she had turned back into a cat. Speaking with Valan, the mage and Cillian both agreed. Of course she was a cat. The prince asked the mage why she had changed back. Valan said he had a theory. He suggested it could be due to the sudden drain on Sanua's energy. Grabbing the boy's shirt with just his fingertips like he was disgusted, Harid called him ungrateful. Cillian commented that they'd now have to wait until the boy recovered his strength to check again. Duke Valan agreed. There wasn't much else they could do for now. Meanwhile, the two teens were glaring at each other in the background like stubborn children. The prince said the best plan was to leave Sanua at the Dusan estate and asked to be notified once the boy regained his strength. For now, he and Renette would return to the palace. Back at the imperial estate, Irina saw the prince's carriage through the window and wondered if they had managed to solve the curse or not. Another maid approached, calling her by name. Irina turned around, surprised. The woman said she was being summoned to the reception room. A little hesitant, she explained that Countess Gisela was the one calling her. Hearing that, Irina froze in fear, wondering why the Countess wanted to see her. Cillian was already pissed off by the whole situation, but he had more matters to handle when he returned. He asked the cat how she was feeling. Renette tried to say she was fine, but the moment she took off her dress and flopped onto the bed, it was clear she was completely drained. Stroking her head, the prince told her he'd be back soon, but for now, she could rest. Irina knocked on the bedroom door, and the prince told her to come in. She apologized for the sudden appearance, but said she had something to report. Cillian and the cat looked over at her. In another room, Cillian was fuming. He couldn't believe the Countess had approached Irina and tried to force her to spy on him. Taking off his glasses, he left the room. Closing the door behind him, Cillian muttered that now he couldn't trust anyone in the palace anymore. The place was exhausting. Walking down the hall, he thought to himself, actually, there was still one person he could trust. When he got to the room, he noticed how unusually quiet it was. His face grew serious. Then, out of nowhere, he heard a meow. Renette immediately ran toward him, clearly overjoyed by his return. A soft smile appeared on his face. Cillian gently picked the cat up in his arms and suggested they go take a walk together. That night, they went out together into the garden. The prince asked if the cat was enjoying herself, and Renette let out a satisfied meow, clearly loving the walk. The trees bathed in silver-blue moonlight, and the lake shimmering under the moon made a beautiful sight in her eyes. That cool but gentle landscape reminded her of Cillian. Sitting on the grass, the prince said he had something for her. He handed her an envelope. The young man explained that it was a letter from Irina, her mother. With a hint of sadness in his voice, the prince said she had already left and didn't get the chance to say goodbye in person, so she asked him to give her daughter this letter. He added that the maid had been worried about Renette the entire trip. Looking at Cillian, Renette thought he was probably thinking about his own mother's letter too. He looked pretty sad. She placed her paws on him like she was trying to comfort him. With a small smile, the prince said she always knew how to calm him down. He figured the reason he stopped having nightmares must have been because of her ability. But Renette, looking skeptical, thought that was probably not it. As nice as it sounded, she doubted she'd gained such powers out of nowhere. The young man went quiet for a second, and to her surprise, Cillian started taking off his shirt. Renette instantly covered her eyes with her paws, but the prince asked her to look. Timidly, Renette started to open her eyes. He said he wanted her to see it for herself. To her shock, all of the scars on his body were gone. He could have just shown her the scar on his hand disappearing, but no, he probably just wanted to mess with her a little by taking off his shirt. Smirking, the prince teased her, saying if she stared any harder, she might burn a hole in him, making her blush even more. Anyway, he explained that he'd started noticing this odd change ever since he began sleeping next to her. More specifically, since they began spending more time together. She was taken aback. It was just a theory, he admitted. Maybe it was all just coincidence. But even if it wasn't, Cillian said Renette was still special to him. She felt so happy hearing that. She didn't know why, but it was just so comforting to hear. Even if she were just an ordinary person, she could tell she would still be someone special to him. Back at the palace, Cillian was greeted by the butler. The prince asked what they wanted from him so late at night. A bit nervous, the staff handed him a box of cookies. With arms crossed and a skeptical look, the young man said the servants claimed the cookies had been sent by Countess Gisela. Renette flinched at the name and immediately backed away from the sweets. She used her entire body to express that he definitely shouldn't eat them. And so, Cillian started to suspect there really might be something sketchy going on. The cat knew perfectly well. If anyone was going to poison cookies, it would be Countess Gisela. The prince stood in silence for a moment. Then he called for Renette, who raised a paw in response. He asked if she remembered what he'd said earlier about his theory regarding her special ability. The cat meowed, clearly doubting he could really do something like that. But reaching for the cookies, he said he'd decided to try just one, to test his theory. After taking a bite, he said he'd find out soon whether or not he'd have nightmares that night. Renette was horrified by what she considered a Nobel Prize-winning level of recklessness. As he licked his fingers, Cillian smiled at her. In her mind, Renette was losing it. Why on earth would he eat that? Later that night, the prince was lying in bed, still asleep. Touching his forehead, Renette was relieved to see that he was okay and didn't seem to be having any nightmares. She'd been worried sick ever since that genius decided to eat the cookie. She hoped things would stay peaceful for the rest of the night. Feeling sleepy, she started to drift off. But suddenly, she had a vision. There was a dagger in her hand, stained with blood. Shocked, she wondered why she was even holding such a thing. She looked up and saw she had stabbed Cillian. Panicking, she couldn't understand what was happening. Her heart pounded and her vision blurred. She heard several voices accusing her, that she was cursed, that she was the child born to destroy the Huppert Empire, that she would kill everyone. With a gasp, Renette woke up breathless, realizing it had all been a dream. She quickly turned over. Cillian was there, right beside her, perfectly fine. He didn't seem bothered by any nightmares, but clearly she had taken them all on for him. That could only mean he'd been having those terrible nightmares all this time before she even showed up. Pushed to the edge and trapped in her fear, she thought, that dark magic potion clearly knew exactly how to torment its victims. A monster that would destroy the Empire. Those words played on her deepest fear. That maybe, just maybe, she really was that creature. Feeling down, she refused to believe it, but she couldn't stop the thoughts from creeping in. Still, if she really had the ability to drive away nightmares, then why had it only started working now? The next day, Cillian was writing a document while the cat sat on his desk. After a while, the young man asked Renette if she was really okay. She looked exhausted, so he wondered if she hadn't slept well. But the cat tried to deny it. He stared silently at her. Then he asked again, if it wasn't sleep, what was going on? Because she kept dozing off in little naps every now and then. Renette pointed toward the window, trying to say it was because of the sunlight. So Cillian raised an eyebrow, asking if she was seriously blaming the weather now. She insisted it was true. Though strangely sleepy, her head was spinning and she was having trouble breathing. That's when Cillian noticed something was really off. The weakness took over, and she started to lose consciousness. Worried, the young man moved closer and called out to her. Renette was about to fall off the desk, but just in time, he caught her. And instead of a cat, it was a girl in his arms. The young man called her name again, and as she slowly opened her eyes, she realized she had transformed back into a human. That's when she also realized she wasn't wearing anything. Quickly, Cillian turned around and took off his coat, handing it to her without looking, his whole face turning bright red. He told her to put it on while he kept his back turned. She wrapped herself in his coat and thanked him, still blushing like crazy. Then she said he could turn back around. When he did, he found Renette completely wrapped up in a blanket on the couch. He burst into laughter. Embarrassed, she asked why he was laughing. But turning dead serious, Cillian just replied, "Laughing? About what?" That only annoyed her more. The first thing the prince did was check if there were any messages from Valon. Renette asked if the Duke had any clue this kind of thing could happen. Opening a small box with a magical artifact, Cillian said that wasn't really the case, but they had prepared some precautions. He had a magic circle installed inside the top drawer of his desk for direct communication. The prince continued, saying the mages had just reported that Manhwa had used his powers again. So maybe there really was a connection between his powers and Renette's transformations. But just as he was about to ask something else, he noticed the girl had vanished. Only the blanket she was wrapped in was left on the couch. He shouted her name in a panic and yanked the blanket, only to find the cat, fast asleep. She'd transformed again. For a second, the young man froze in confusion. With a serious expression, he thought, if she was asleep, why was she a cat again? In the letter, the mages had written they suspected using powers triggered side effects. Cillian thought that made sense as he bit his hand in slight anxiety. But maybe it wasn't him. Maybe the potion was affecting the cat instead. How did he even know about the potion if Renette never told him? No idea. Let's just say the plot demanded it. Cillian replied to the letter saying he'd appreciate if the mages could investigate further. It could be the influence of the magic potion. But the Duke warned it was too risky to pursue now, especially since Valon had been visiting the palace more often lately. Any strange moves could spark suspicion from His Majesty. The prince replied that if the Duke couldn't come to him, then he'd just go there himself. He got up and started putting his clothes back on. On the way, Cillian wondered if maybe he was just dreaming too much. He thought about how every living thing that ever got close to him eventually left. Suddenly, the young man ran into the Emperor and Countess Gisela. She was clinging to Adolf's arm. Gisela asked where he was going so late at night. The prince instinctively held Renette tight in his pocket while greeting His Majesty. The Emperor asked if he was heading out, and the Countess added that it was already quite late. Cillian answered that he was on his way to Claude City. He then asked what was in the blood-stained sack the guard was holding. Adolf replied that it was a baby fox he'd just hunted. He explained that Catherine had gotten scared when the animal suddenly appeared in the garden. The woman said she only screamed because she thought it was a cat, smiling at the prince as she said it. The Emperor added that she scared easily and that it was a relief it wasn't a cat. The prince gave them a cold, serious look. He thought, whatever. One day, he'd tear this man apart piece by piece with his own hands. Cillian then commented that the sack seemed a bit too big for a small fox. Suddenly, the Emperor placed a hand on his shoulder, and with a twisted grin, he said that the mother had come running when he tried to kill the baby fox. Then all the babies followed their mother. He mocked her for trying to fight back, saying she only ended up dooming all her children. Cillian's heart pounded in his chest. His disgust for that man, and for humans, boiled inside him. The memory of his mother locked away in a corner of the palace came flooding back, and now they were mocking him with stories like this. Trying to keep it together, he asked if the hunt had at least been satisfying. The Emperor laughed, saying it was ridiculous to call it a hunt, just a bit of fun for the evening. In that case, the prince said he'd make sure to prepare something entertaining for next time. Adolf raised an eyebrow, asking what he meant. And with a terrifying smile, Cillian promised he'd prepare a hunt that neither the Emperor nor the Countess had ever seen before. He added that he'd do it, if they would allow it. Smiling back, Gisela agreed. She said she was looking forward to it. Chuckling to himself, Cillian said goodbye and walked off, heading in the exact opposite direction. Cillian said his goodbyes to the Emperor and made his way to the exit. Galloping away at full speed, he was determined. He would never lose anyone who belonged to him again, and anyone who dared to get in the way. He'd make sure to kill them without hesitation. Back at the palace, Catherine was walking alongside the Emperor, silently judging the prince for saying he was heading to Claude City so late at night. It gave the whole situation a slightly vulgar taste. A low-status woman, strikingly beautiful, a maid who disappeared without a trace. If the prince really was the one hiding her so she'd never be found again, then it would all make sense. She then turned to His Majesty and said there was something she wanted. The Emperor, arrogant as ever, told her to just ask. Whatever it was, she'd have it. Meanwhile, the villainess was thinking to herself, poor guy. He doesn't even realize. The more he tries to hide something he truly loves. And just as she asked the Emperor to tell her where the baby fox had been hidden, she finished her thought. The more I want to find it and steal what he cherishes most. The wizard tells the prince that Herod will bring Sanua soon, so he must wait there. He also asks if by any chance the prince will take Miss Renette back if she wakes up. Annoyed, the prince asks why he wants to know that, but he explains that they have been fortunate enough to be carried like a cat until now. But what will happen from now on is very unpredictable. If she really stays in human form while she sleeps, it would be much harder to take her there. Therefore, Your Majesty should consider how right it would be to keep her in the palace, since it will be dangerous for both her and the prince. But he insisted that Renette will indeed stay with him. At that moment, Sanua arrives in the room. He casually asks how he will know how to wake a cat, and even jokes, asking if they have tried shaking the cat. But when he looks at the prince, he realizes that he is not so cheerful. Sanua feels a bit lost about what to do because he has no idea how he will wake her, but he needs to try. So what he can do now is try to put his power into her. However, when he does that, the only thing that happens is that she transforms into a human, and everyone becomes worried that she is still sleeping. The prince calls Harid, who is even startled, afraid of what might happen, and asks him to read Renee's memories as the prince suspects something. Harid approaches. As soon as the memories start to appear to Harid, he sees someone holding a dagger threatening another person, and suddenly this person uses the dagger against the man in front of him. Harid is shocked, not knowing what to say, and he says that in the memory everyone died. That woman killed everyone in the end. The prince cuts in, saying that she killed him in his memories, and Harid is perplexed to know how the prince knew that. He says it's because it's exactly what he dreamed every day before meeting Renette and believes she is having the nightmare in his place. Sometime later, Renette wakes up, startled. Someone beside her asks if she had a nightmare, and crying, she agrees. However, the faceless person says that she is still in the nightmare. The protagonist panics and starts running aimlessly around her. Voices say that it's all her fault since she killed everyone. Realizing that she won't be able to escape, she stops running. While crying, the voice says that because of her, everything will be in ruins, in addition to telling her to grab the dagger in front of her. A silhouette of a man appears, and the voice insists that she take the dagger. The voice orders Renette to approach the man and pierce his heart, since if she does that, all the bad things and pains will go away. But before she approaches, Renette manages to see that the silhouette reminds her of someone. It seems as if her dream gained color. She remembers the prince calling his name and saying that it's time to wake up. The next day, the prince caresses the protagonist's face while she suffers in her sleep. Finally, she opens her eyes, seeing the prince calling her. When she tries to call his name, something starts to choke her throat, making her cough uncontrollably. Cillian becomes worried as the girl cannot say a word, and she feels a great difficulty in breathing, which the prince notices. Approaching her, he tells her to calm down, that he will help her, thus kissing her gently, which helps Renette stop choking for a moment, and she returns the kiss. Sometime later, Valant asks the prince if it wouldn't be better for her to rest a bit. However, remembering the events of the previous day, the prince says he has a plan, saying that he will bring Renette back to the real world by force. Irina sighs as she closes the door to the protagonist's room. At this moment, His Majesty appears to see if Renette is still sleeping, to which Irina sadly responds that, unfortunately, she hasn't woken up at all. Irina says she remembered what she wanted to tell her daughter. She recounts the story of the bleeding tree, a tale passed down through generations in the family, and that it might have some clue to break the curse. Cillian says he will inform Renette as soon as she wakes up. Informing that he will take care of her from now on, he tells Irina to rest. However, as soon as he enters the room, he comes across Renette freshly awake sitting on the bed. He runs towards her before she can say anything, afraid she might fall asleep again, and says that he was very worried while stroking her head, which makes Renette really feel like a pet. She says it's fine that he doesn't need to worry. Cillian then comments that his mother asked him to say something as soon as she woke up. about the story of the tree that bleeds, since she doesn't remember the details correctly, and during the time you were sleeping, they used the dark magic potion. But before he can finish telling things, Sanua opens the door as if it were something urgent. This surprises both of them, but the prince doesn't seem to like it at all. He jokingly asks why it took her so long to wake up, and that he spent that time practicing how to control his power, which is why she is able to stay in human form. Furthermore, he concludes that she is awake thanks to him. Renette laughs, thanking him for his help, while the prince throws daggers with his gaze. The protagonist remembers that the last time Samua used his powers, he felt unwell, so she asks if he is okay. The two argue about who is more worried about the other, while only worsening the prince's irritation, until Cillian reaches his limit and tells Sanua to leave the room, who, not understanding anything, is already outside. Sometime later, they are discussing Illumicedio, a potion that manifests your greatest fear in the form of a nightmare. Herod says that if Countess Gisela really made this potion, it means she has magical power. And if that's the case, the Royal Magic Department would keep an eye on her. So he concludes that she probably must have formed some kind of alliance with them. Renette says that the Countess has no magical power, and the prince asks how she knows that. She recounts that there was a time when the Countess entered the prince's room while she was in cat form. Gisela was trying everything to get some negative information about the prince. If she had powers, she would have detected the magic in the pajamas the protagonist was wearing. Valon comments that maybe Gisela could have gotten the potion from someone, and it could even be Macmillan since he has a good relationship with the Countess. Reno Macmillan is merely a parasite of political power. He doesn't have what it takes to do something so bold, comments the prince. Renette wonders who it could be then. They decide that to find this out, they will need access to the guest list for the Royal Masquerade Ball, precisely because it was at this ball that she began to be noticed at court. So probably her assistant is also on this list. The prince agrees with Renette, since you can only be invited if you receive a direct invitation. However, the problem is that it is Gisela herself who organizes the list, since she is the person responsible for the party. Valon questions whether it wasn't the Hamiltons who took care of this before, and the prince explains that the reason Gisela is in charge today is because the Hamiltons disappeared suddenly, which leaves everyone shocked. As Queen Elise's condition worsened significantly, the palace needed someone who could take her place to host the Royal Masquerade Ball. Precisely because of this, the Hamiltons took on this role. However, the truth is that the Hamiltons and their supporters were all involved in corruption and bribery. When the Hamilton couple disappeared, Countess Gisela took on the role of managing the inner palace, and her tyranny became even bolder. Guinée thinks she didn't know the palace was so corrupt inside, and her thoughts are soon interrupted by the prince calling her. She, startled because she didn't even see him enter, asks if he has been there for a while, but he says he just arrived, knocked on the door, but she didn't answer. Cillian says she was probably too immersed in her thoughts and didn't notice someone opening the door. Annoyed, she asks if he came just to scold her, but he says no. Then he asks what she was thinking so deeply about, and Guinée explains that it's about the reason they were talking just a little while ago, and that it will probably be very difficult to get the Countess's list. Even harder, she thinks, will be finding the Hamiltons and wonders if they are really alive. Moving closer to her, Cillian says that wizards can track a person using magic, which makes her excited, thinking it will really be easy to find them. Since they are very close, she feels a bit embarrassed and looks away. This shyness is precisely because ever since she woke up, her memories have been slowly returning, and she remembers that kiss that happened a few days ago. Changing the subject, she asks what the prince came to do there. He says that before leaving, he needs to tell her something. Renette is confused because she didn't know he was going to leave. So Cillian explains that he will have to leave, but she will stay there for a while. She wonders if she will be alone there, as that makes her quite anxious, and asks him if it's because she is now in her human form, since when she was a cat, it was much easier to hide her. However, he says that's not it, that this isn't the problem. The issue is that she needs to stay there, as there is something for her to do in the next 15 days. Valon will explain everything, so she doesn't need to worry and pinches her nose. Renette feels a bit more relieved and says she hopes the 15 days pass quickly, but this made her realize that since they were always together, she has a sense of trust in Cillian. He questions whether she really thinks it will pass quickly, to which she agrees, saying it's just 2 weeks. Cillian feels a bit upset but doesn't comment, as it seems to him that it will be a long time away from her. Sometime later, she is having tea and asks if she will have to go to the masquerade ball in her human form. The prince explains that the power of Sanwa is still not perfect, but she will be able to stay in human form while she is awake. Renette feels a bit apprehensive about attending the masquerade ball, especially in her human form, which she is not so used to. but the prince assures her that Duke Brynhilde will help them. Although it is one of the few duchies that exist in the empire, they rarely leave their territory. The Duke is married, but he has not had any children yet. Even so, she still worries that someone might find it suspicious. Leaning on her hand, he writes on her hand while speaking, Reinette Brynhild, surprised by the sudden touch. The prince states that this will be her name from now on, and that she is capable of doing this. As he prepares to leave, he hears someone calling him from afar. When he looks, Reinette is on the balcony waving at him. Valon jokes that the prince should wave back since Reinette seems quite determined, but he refuses and turns his back, realizing the immaturity. Valon remembers that he will be without seeing her for a considerable time, yet he says it's all right. Reinette is shocked because he simply ignored her, but it seems he only did it out of spite for what she had said earlier, saying that 15 days would be a short time. Already in the carriage, the prince comments to Valon that as soon as he finds any clue about the Hamiltons, he should report immediately. Valon tells the prince not to worry, and regarding the carriage driver, Harid has already erased all his memories about the route. The prince thinks while looking out of the carriage, the Empire of Hubert has prohibited black magic. And for that reason, he believed that for a long time, all things related to black magic had been completely eradicated. He then asks Valon if he needed to seek information about black magic that was not available to the public. Where would he happen to find that information? Valon replies that in that case, the ideal would be to look in the archives of the royal library. The prince comments that Countess Gisela asked for permission to access the royal documents. His father at the time granted that permission, of course, and according to Reinette, Gisela does not possess any type of black magic. So to use black magic, she probably possesses some magical object. And the answer to that is likely in the royal archives. Speaking of her and her location, Gisela is searching through the archives for something, commenting that there are many books. Looking at her ring, she says it always gives her a bad feeling since it has human blood within the gems. She wonders who Fabian would be in them, and for some reason, the ring starts to hurt her own finger. She responds to the ring that she will keep searching so it won't get angry, but someone interrupts her. It's the butler asking if everything is all right, as he received a message from the emperor to look for her. Putting on her best act, she says that His Majesty cannot be a minute apart from her. As she walks back to the king's chambers, she thinks she has no idea what this book the ring wants is about, but probably finding it won't be difficult once the whole palace is in her hands. Rummaging through that entire library will be easy. The next morning, Reinette comments that it's corn soup again, while her mother says it's her favorite, which is why she made it again. Not knowing how to refuse to eat this every day, Reinette thinks she didn't intend to say she liked the soup to eat it every day. While grabbing a piece of bread, she wonders if Cillian is eating properly. Furthermore, she worries if by any chance he consumed something with that black magic potion. Annoyed at remembering that he didn't respond to any of her letters, she thinks that perhaps she wouldn't have to imagine these responses. Every day she waited, however, he didn't send even a single letter. And remembering what he had mentioned, that it is much harder to detect black magic in food, she becomes more concerned that he might be starving. Sanhwa, noticing that Reinette is sniffing the air for no reason, asks her why she is doing that, and if he has any strange smell. Taking the opportunity to tease, Harid tells him to go take a shower, and the two start to argue while Reinette tries to eat her soup. She does everything to try to stay focused on fulfilling her part, yet she feels disappointed for not having communicated all this time. At the end of the day, Harith says that for today that's all for the lesson, and Reinette seems quite tired. Meanwhile, Harid comments that he will give a test to see what she learned tomorrow. He also mentions that since her father is not present, there was no option but to teach her. Reinette says that it is expected since he is behind the investigation of the Hamilton case, and probably that's why Harid will be busy. She then asks if there is anything she could help with. He says that in most things no, but there is just one thing that might be useful for her. While Reinette sneakily looks at the door, she remembers her mission to bring Sanhwa to Harid. The boy is simply sitting in the garden taking a nap. Reinette approaches, and he in a defensive manner says that he is just on his break and not skipping class. As she sits down, Reinette asks if the classes are very difficult, and Sanhwa says that it is not because it is difficult, but rather boring. Learning about texts that he has no idea what they are and nothing about animals, Reinette realizes that Sanhwa really likes animals. And remembering the prince's words regarding the family tale about the bleeding tree, Reinette wonders if perhaps he knows something about plants. He says that he might know something and what she would really like to ask. Reinette asks if he knows anything about the bleeding tree, but the useless one says he knows absolutely nothing. Looking at a bird flying in the sky, Sanhwa asks her to repeat the question. Then he comments that if she wants to know about plants, the best option would be to ask the animals that live in the forest. Renette is impressed and says that Manhwa is, in fact, a genius. With his ability to communicate with animals, it might now be easier to get tips regarding that curse. And so, Renette hugs Manhwa in gratitude. He complains, telling her to get away from him, and, obviously, that our dear prince arrived at that exact moment. He approaches calling Renette, and she is surprised to look back and see that it is the prince. She asks him if he came to fetch her, but he says he only came because someone expressed a lot of anger in the last letter. Renette is impressed, first, that she wrote that somewhat nervous letter, and second, that he was actually reading the letters she sent. She says she was just worried about his health and wanted to know why he wasn't responding, but not that she was angry. He says that is exactly why he came, specifically because of what just happened, but the poor protagonist is just very emotional that he came only because of her letter and doesn't even notice the jealousy. Harriet appears, asking what the prince came to do at this hour, and then he realizes that Manhwa was skipping class in the garden. It seems that the two are already arguing again, and the prince tells Renette that they should go to her room, since she seemed to want to talk a lot in the letter. Already in the room, Renette asks if he is sleeping well at night. Even though he says yes, she accuses him, saying that he clearly doesn't look like it, since he is full of dark circles under his eyes. Moreover, she comments that he looks paler and offers him some tea. While he drinks the tea she prepared, Cillian asks how her time in the palace has been. Responding excitedly, she says that everything is wonderful and that there is nothing uncomfortable for her. However, the truth is that she doesn't want him to worry. Cillian says that even so, he will still take her back to the palace where he is, even though she finds this place comfortable. What Renette already knew? After all, it was kind of obvious that they would end up together. And that's when she realized that perhaps the fact that she said she was super comfortable there might seem like she doesn't want to go back to his house anymore. So she starts to fumble, saying that she is doing everything to learn the lessons as quickly as possible and be able to return to the palace with him. Believing that this clarified everything, Renette feels relieved. Looking at the empty cup, she wonders why he doesn't seem sleepy, since she made the teas specifically for him to sleep well, and decides to ask if he isn't feeling sleepy, to which he says absolutely not. She remembers that the last time she had this tea, she practically fell asleep standing up. How was it possible that he wasn't even sleepy? Determined to make him sleep, Renette approaches, wraps her arms around his neck, and Cillian asks what she is trying to do. She quickly apologizes and pushes her body onto his to make him lie down on the sofa. The poor prince doesn't understand anything this crazy girl is doing, and neither do we, right? Why this urge to make the other sleep? But okay. And she is super embarrassed with her face buried in his chest. With the situation feeling a bit strange, he comments that this is how people feel when they say their heart skipped a beat, and questions Renette why she is doing this. The shameless one says it's precisely because she wants him to have a good night's sleep. Cillian even laughs, because this attempt to simply throw her body on top of him isn't very effective for a good sleep, but he appreciates her determination. Standing up, she says that since she got what she wanted, now she will take her leave. But he pulls her back. In a moment that could lead to a kiss, but obviously didn't happen, Cillian asks what she will do if he doesn't let her leave, and even says that this is exactly why he won't sleep. Those who understand will understand. Here I no longer know if it's innocence or if she is pretending not to understand, but she says it's impossible, since the tea he drank is precisely a sleeping aid. Then, she covers her eyes with her hands, and Cillian says he finally understood why she kept looking at the cup while he drank. And maybe that tea was even dangerous, since she could get trapped in those nightmares again. Renette tells him not to worry, because no one knows what will happen. But what is important is that he needs to rest, as he can't stay awake forever. When his eyes start to feel heavy, he can hear Renette in the background saying, "Your Majesty, just trust me and sleep a little." Sometime later, and he is startled to find that he really slept. When he looks at his legs, he realizes that Renette is no longer there. Quickly, he starts searching for her throughout the room and decides to look for her outside, since apparently she is not in the room. As soon as he opens the door, from a distance as he approaches, the prince sees that she is talking to Manhwa. The two continue talking about the lessons and laughing as if nothing is happening. So much so that the jealous one is already thinking about how relaxed she seems with Manhwa and that she never had that expression with him. Suffering alone, Cillian thinks that even though he has known her from the beginning, she doesn't seem to act so freely when she is with him, and only with that damned one. Turning to leave, Renette notices the prince's presence and runs after him asking if he slept well. The fool just replies that yes and thanks dryly. Renette tries not to push the subject too much, since he seems to still be tired and somehow in a bad mood. But before they can talk more, someone comes running calling the prince. Herod says that his father has returned and he found the Hamiltons in a cabin in the middle of the night. Herod warns the prince that the Hamiltons were taken there, but to be careful, as they seem to be very agitated. As soon as the door opens, someone throws several things towards the prince, shouting to let them go. While the wizards try to restrain the two, they continue shouting, asking if by any chance those damned wizards know who they are dealing with. Renetta is shocked to see the appearance of the Hamiltons. As far as she knows, they were responsible for managing the royal house and had a large fortune, but now they are in a deplorable state. Renetta feels a strange sensation. The worried prince asks what happened, and she says that they have a very strong smell of black magic potion. The gentleman continues shouting, saying that as soon as he returns to the palace, he will make sure to execute all of them. Finally, he notices the presence of the prince. Kneeling, he says he made a mistake and asks to spare his life. The prince addresses Valan and asks how he found the two. Valan says he was trying to locate them through magic until he discovered a suspicious wall in a basement in their mansion. As soon as he broke that wall, he found the Hamiltons locked inside. The prince questions whether there is any chance the two locked themselves in there to avoid the accusations that were about to happen. Valan says that with the amount of black magic detected in their food, it is quite unlikely they did it on their own. While Valan is talking to the prince, Mrs. Hamilton is murmuring something. As soon as she spots Raynette from behind, she calls her Catherine. Raynette is startled, not understanding what is happening, while the wizards try to restrain Mrs. Hamilton, but she starts throwing things at Raynette, telling her to defend herself. Realizing something was going to hit her, she just closed her eyes. Nothing more. And the prince quickly stepped in front to protect her from the vase, while Mrs. Hamilton continues shouting Catherine that this is all her fault. Valan uses his magic to restrain the lady, who keeps crying and screaming that it is all Catherine's fault, looking at Raynette. The protagonist realizes that there must be something very wrong with the Hamiltons, as she is confusing Reynald with Gisela. Irritated with the situation, the prince warns the two one last time that he is tired of this nonsense and they must confess exactly what happened. They all witnessed and were involved in all the crimes committed by Catherine Harmon Gisela. Mr. Hamilton, who is crouched down, begins to speak about Catherine, that damned witch. He knew there was something strange about her from the beginning, especially because she appeared out of nowhere like a pebble, went to the palace, and rose to power. Cillian questions Hamilton to find out who is responsible for giving power to Gisela, as that person is probably on the guest list for the ball. The gentleman replies that he would very much like to tell everything, but he knows very little about the person who wrote the letter. The only thing he saw was Catherine handing him the letter without any escort. The prince then asks what the content of the letter was. Hamilton replies that it was a letter requesting that Catherine attend the ball. In addition to requesting that Minister Cliver MacLean be noted as her partner, Raynette realizes that in her memories from the book, she does not remember anyone by that name. Something is not right. The gentleman continues saying that the strange thing was that as soon as the news about the king and Catherine spread, Mr. MacLean went to the Hamiltons to ask who Catherine was. However, later when he saw the two together, the minister seemed to be flattering Catherine. The prince asks how Mr. Hamilton ended up in that basement. As soon as Catherine took power, the Hamiltons' position began to be threatened. It was at that moment that Catherine suggested they take a year off and that if she managed to take over the castle, she would reward them. Since they had no good reason to refuse the proposal, they were preparing to leave when they received a visitor. In moments, they lost consciousness and woke up in the basement locked up. However, every time they regained consciousness, they were eating that strange food and passed out again. He thanks your majesty for having freed them from hell, and the four leave the place. Cillian orders Valen to take care of the Hamiltons for now, since it is now time to investigate more about Cliver MacLean. A few days later, Raynette was getting ready for the masquerade ball. Her mother says she knows the prince will be there to protect her, but she must be careful. Raynette thanks her for the concern as she says goodbye to her mother Valon, who is with the protagonist in the carriage, comments that they can already see the castle, and she gets nervous thinking that she will go there in her human form. The protagonist remembers that the prince warned her that her mission would be to attract the king's attention. However, she was upset that he only said that and then left, especially because she was worried about turning into a cat again. However, Cillian pets her head, saying that she does not have to worry because he is sure everything will be fine. Still unsure, she asks him how he will smell the black magic without her. After all, Valen said that for the black magic potion, only the one who made the potion knows how to make the antidote. Because of this, it is concerning for him to stay in the castle alone, but he interrupts her and he says she will be fine. For him, her safety is more important. But of course, our little troublemaker is planning a scheme to get the antidote on her own. Preparing herself, she believes she can find something in Gisella's room. Already at the ball, Rainette thinks about how she will find Cillian in this crowd. Valon approaches Rainette and says that the one up ahead is the head of the servants. He usually favors Countess Gisella. Irritated, the protagonist thinks that his mask is perfect for a coward like him, but she decides that now is not the time to speak ill of others, and she goes up the stairs to look for the prince. Looking around, she thinks she should have asked what mask he would be wearing. However, someone bumps into her from behind. The prince, wearing a rather ugly horned mask, asks if she is looking for someone. Surprised, she recognizes Cillian's voice. However, she decides to pretend she doesn't know, asking who he is. Right in her ear, he says he is someone who can't sleep away from her, and asks, "Does that ring a bell?" Embarrassed, Rainette laughs as she says he really is a fool. Besides asking how he recognized her, which let's agree isn't very difficult, pretending it was incredible skills, Cillian replies that he knew just by looking. While the two talk, Gisella is watching from afar. Noticing that the girl with white hair has returned crawling alone, Rainette tells him to forget about the mass talk since they have more important things to do. Then she realizes that Catherine is right there on the other side watching the two of them. For a moment, she wonders if that is really the Countess, which I really don't understand about not being able to recognize someone because of a tiny mask, but okay, let's continue. She questions why the Countess is looking in their direction. Then the protagonist decides to pull Cillian to another location, just to get out of Gisella's radar. Seeing the two move, Gisella just chuckles, saying that they really should run as much as they can, since there is no place in the palace where they can hide that she doesn't know about. As they reach the center of the ball, Rainette believes they are hidden enough, which doesn't make sense since Catherine was just on the balcony. But a girl ends up screaming, which draws everyone's attention because her hair got caught in the prince's clothes. When she turns to try to free her hair, she trips over her own dress and falls on top of the prince, and for some reason, their masks also fall to the ground, making them stare at each other. Rainette is shocked because she recognizes this woman with hair as red as roses and eyes as golden as the sun. This was the female protagonist of the original soap opera, Vanessa Eckler. In the soap opera, the romantic pair meets at the first masked ball, and they end up getting closer when Cillian tries to untangle the knot that her hair made on the button of his clothes. The prince, for some reason, calls Rainette to help him get the girl's hair out of his clothes. She agrees, but is a bit shocked to think that this is different from the soap opera. After a while trying, she manages to free the girl's hair from his clothes, while he stands up, saying it would have been much easier if they had just cut her hair. But Rainette says that doesn't make sense. The girl, hearing the protagonist call him Your Majesty, is shocked because she didn't know what the face of the crown prince looked like. She picks up his mask from the ground and while trembling, she returns it, apologizing profusely for not recognizing him and also for what happened. Cillian says it's no problem. After all, it was just an accident. Meanwhile, Rainette looks at the two and can only think about how naturally compatible they seem, even though it's the first time they are meeting. She wonders if this is because they are the protagonists of this world, thinking that this is a bit strange and feeling different. The girl calls Rainette Duchess Brynhild, which startles her. Then she apologizes and introduces herself as Vanessa Enclair. Rainette says it's a pleasure and also introduces herself as Rainette Brynhild. Vanessa says it's a pleasure to meet them and asks if, by any chance, they came as each other's companions. Sensing the atmosphere, she asks if perhaps they are a couple, since His Majesty doesn't seem able to take his eyes off Rainette. Panicking, the protagonist says no, that it's a mistake. They do know each other for some time, but there is nothing romantic between them. Vanessa says she is very sorry for misinterpreting. Asking for permission then, she withdraws, while Rainette waves, responding that it will be a pleasure to see her again along with Her Majesty, who is nothing special. The prince didn't understand anything. The reason Rainette was speaking this way was to make it clear that they are not a couple. Meanwhile, the girl was freaking out from the stress. He asks if she hates being confused as his romantic partner so much. Sneaking away, she says she was just correcting the misunderstanding and asks for permission, as she will rest for a minute. Outside, while admiring the moon, the protagonist realizes that the story has already deviated a lot from the original plot. The romantic pair was supposed to have met as if it had been destiny. Precisely for that reason, it wouldn't be strange if they met several times before finally starting to fall in love. Unlike her, who is cursed, Rainette wonders where she should go if she cannot be with Cillian. Speaking of him, Cillian appears behind her, placing his cloak over the protagonist's shoulders. He takes off his mask and says that she has a habit of always making him worry. Asking if something happened, Rainette denies, saying she was just a little tired. He helps her put the mask back on. Then he apologizes for making her go through this, even though she is tired. However, it would be important for her not to take off this mask from now on. Someone knocks on the door saying it is Valon and informs that the king has arrived at the banquet. Everyone celebrates his entrance into the hall. The emperor sits on the throne while everyone applauds. Renette, also applauding, notices something peculiar. Gisela was actually sitting next to the emperor, in place of the empress. Harid taught her that at events like this, the empress appears to showcase the grandeur of royalty and authority. However, the empress is not present at this masked ball, and instead Gisela is sitting next to the emperor. Definitely something is not right. Vanessa passes by everyone without the mask and greets the emperor. Renette asks Valon if they need to take off their masks to greet his majesty. And Valon explains that most nobles do this because they want to show their faces to the emperor. At that moment, Renette notices that Gisela is watching Vanessa. In the original novel, Vanessa also caught Gisela's attention, and as a result, the countess made an offer. That was precisely to turn her into someone to serve directly to the empress. However, unbeknownst to Vanessa, there was only one obstacle. One of the existing ones would be eliminated so that she could serve the empress. Renette remembers that the eliminated person was precisely Countess Cavendish, who is normally the closest aide to the empress. The protagonist knows that if for some reason Gisela keeps the same plan, the countess will be in danger. She then decides to introduce herself to the Count and Countess Cavendish, saying her name is Renette Brynhilde. The Count is happy to meet someone from the Brynhilde family and introduces himself as Alec Cavendish and his wife Sophia Cavendish. Renette says she is honored to meet them, as she has always wanted to meet the Countess. In the novel, Countess Cavendish was known for her unwavering loyalty to the Empress. Upon hearing Renette's words, the Countess is flattered and asks why the young lady was interested in her. Renette then, imitating an angel, says it is precisely because the Countess takes such good care of the Empress that naturally, the interest in getting to know her arose. Continuing, she says that the Empress usually does everything to maintain the peace and prosperity of the empire. And for that reason, Renette would like to follow in those footsteps, reading and meditating to control the tranquility of her soul. The Countess finds it funny and even a bit poetic, saying that the Empress would be very happy to hear this if she were there. Changing the subject, the protagonist says that since it is her first time visiting the castle, she would like to make friends her age and asks if by any chance they have a daughter. Remembering the story, Countess Cavendish indeed has a daughter, who precisely in the novel was part of Countess Gisela's plan, to make Countess Cavendish travel to Lithburn to visit her daughter, and on the way suffer an accident. The Countess says it is a pity, but her daughter is already married and had a child last night. Adding that she will visit her tomorrow, Renette asks how far the city where the Countess's daughter lives is, and she explains that it takes about half a day by carriage. Therefore, they will leave early to arrive before sunset. The protagonist realizes that she will have to hurry to save the Countess's life and interrupt Gisela's plans. Determined to do this, she ends up getting distracted and hears someone calling her from afar. Turning, she sees Gisela approaching. Gisela asks the young lady's name. Renette signals Valon not to interfere and introduces herself as Renette Brynhilde. Gisela comments that Brynhilde stays in Daneburg, where foreigners can rarely enter, and wonders if she would see her again. But she has an idea. Calling everyone around, he says that since the opportunity is rare, why doesn't Miss Brynhilde take off her mask for everyone? Automatically, several people begin to agree with Gisela, saying it would be an honor to see Miss Brynhilde's face. Not knowing what to do, Renette wonders why they are putting her in this position. It even seems like Gisela wants to confirm something by seeing her face. To spice things up, the Countess says that everyone is asking, so the young lady could not refuse. Realizing she is cornered, Renette starts to think about what she could do to get out of this without stopping to suspect for refusing to take off her mask. But she remembers the prince's words not to take off the mask under any circumstances, and decides to tell everyone that she will not take off the mask. Gisela is shocked and asks the young lady to repeat. The protagonist speaks loudly and clearly that she does not want to take off the mask. Everyone stood still, shocked by the young lady's boldness. Gisela tries to argue, but Renette is firm and says she believes the Countess will not insist anymore, since she has made herself very clear on this matter. Caught by surprise, Gisela doesn't even know what to respond. Back in her room, she throws a glass against the wall in hatred of that white-haired girl. How dare she embarrass the Countess in front of everyone. She asks her maid to send an urgent message to the Brynhildes, asking her maid to check if that damned girl really is from the Brynhilde house. However, the maid, a bit more sensible, says that this would be bad, because it would seem like she is suspecting the young lady. But Gisela spares no effort and slaps the maid, who falls to the ground asking her when she got permission to speak. The poor girl is trying to compose herself, apologizing. and Gisela says that woman is definitely the maid she saw the other day. Since platinum white hair is not common, it is not possible that a servant manipulated the prince to get a new identity and enter the palace. This irritates Gisela, because that is exactly how she managed to get to where she is today. However, she is interrupted by another maid saying they have a problem. The girl says she was able to bring Miss Vanessa to Claire as requested, but irritated, Gisela asks why it is taking so long to speak. And the girl continues saying that on the way to the Countess's chambers, Her Majesty privately called Miss Brynhild. In the other room, the Emperor says he cannot believe the Brynhildes protected and hid their daughter all this time. The Emperor says he did not say this to apologize, but rather because he was curious about one thing. But before he continues, the guard announces that Prince Cillian has arrived. The Emperor comments that the prince is late for tea, and that he was just going to ask more about the young lady's family, and asks if she is an only child, to which Reinette agrees. The prince says that was precisely why he suggested to the Duke to send the young lady to the ball, as it would be a good opportunity to connect her with other nobles and represent her family. The Emperor asks why the Duke did not come personally, and the prince says it is precisely because the young lady will be the next successor of the Brynhildes, adding, the prince says that, moreover, the Duke said that Miss Reinette was the most beautiful and brilliant in the world. The two keep praising Reinette while she feels embarrassed by so many compliments. The Emperor comments that he would like to know much more about the Brynhildes and their city, asking if Reinette would like to stay a few more days at the castle, besides giving Katerine the opportunity to apologize for what happened. Before Reinette can respond, he continues saying he believes Katerine did not mean any harm when she asked the young lady to take off her mask. But even so, he would like her to apologize. The protagonist says she accepts the offer and thanks him for his kindness. The Emperor then asks Cillian to help Reinette feel comfortable in the castle, which the prince agrees to. Saying goodbye, the Emperor tells the two to enjoy the rest of the tea. As soon as he leaves, Reinette finally manages to breathe, that this is probably considered drawing the attention of His Majesty, but questions the prince what he would do if the Emperor had not called her for this tea. He comments that probably he would introduce her as someone he would like to marry, which makes Reinette spit all her tea in the prince's face. While he says he was just joking, she, embarrassed, says it's good that he really is. Offended, he asks if she hates that idea. Reinette tries to disguise it, saying that's not what she meant. Taking the opportunity, he moves closer and then asks if she would marry him, pretending not to understand. But blushing, Reinette asks what he said. While holding her hair, he asks again if she would like to marry him. After a while of staring at each other, the prince laughs, which irritates the protagonist, realizing he was just playing with her heart. He then offers his hand, saying he will take her to his room, and asks if there is anywhere she would like to go. Reinette says she would like to know where Gisela's room is, since the antidote for the potion is probably there. A bit irritated, the prince asks why she is doing things he didn't ask her to do. Embarrassed for speaking so rudely, the prince apologizes and says he didn't mean to sound aggressive. He was just worried. Even so, Reinette insists that it might be a great opportunity because with the antidote it will be safer for him. Holding her hand, the prince says that he doesn't want her to go through anything dangerous. The protagonist understands that Cillian is worried and wants her to be safe. But unfortunately, this is her only chance to find the antidote. As they walk down the palace corridor, Reinette tries to think of how she will find out where Gisela's room is. Since convincing the prince is off the table, Cillian says it's getting late and it would be better for them to do the castle tour tomorrow. However, Reinette says she can't tomorrow since she will have to go to Lichborn. The prince is confused because he wasn't aware of these plans and questions what she will do there. She knows very well that if she tells the truth, he won't let her go. So, making up a lie, Reinette says she heard that there are many shops with different dresses in that city, and that's why she wants to go there. Cillian suggests they go together then, and she tries to make an excuse, saying it's a secret store that only women can enter. And what would they think if they saw the prince with her? Obviously, he says it's fine, that he will just drop her off in front of the place. Trying her last option, Reinette asks for a favor instead. The next day, Reinette is ready to go, and she thanks the maids for helping her get ready. She still finds it very strange to receive this kind of treatment because when she was in her cat form, she just slept, ate, and talked with the prince. Getting into the carriage, Reinette is determined to do what she needs, especially while she is in her human form. Gisela is in her room watching as Reinette enters the carriage, and she thinks it's an impressive opportunity that Miss Brynhild will leave the castle. However, Gisela says that, in fact, it is not Reinette Brynhilde, but Irina Scott. Gisela remembers her own story. A girl from humble beginnings who didn't even know who her father was. pretending to be a noble and managing to become the emperor's concubine, and she believes that this is what Irina is trying to do, not knowing that, in fact, it is Irina's daughter, and no one is trying to do that. However, believing in this story, she starts to devise a plan. Since, in her mind, Irina wants to steal her position, she deserves to be crushed and lose her life. Irritated, the Countess can only think that they are very much alike. Father and daughter have the same taste in women. She knows that the Emperor, who is already addicted to the black magic potion, will succumb to his death without her having to do anything more. But the prince is different. Perhaps this opportunity is even good, since she will reveal that this girl is not the true daughter of the Brynhildes, and thus end her and the prince together. Finally, managing to take over the entire royal castle, buying a bunch of things, filling the carriage, and Renetti thinks it's necessary to cover up her previous lie. And she realizes that since she left the castle, there are two guys following her like ghosts. She remembers what she asked the prince as a favor, which was precisely for an escort, justifying that she didn't want any of Gisella's lackeys following her to avoid getting into a dangerous situation during her shopping. The prince laughed at the situation at the time, saying he found it funny because she asked for something he was going to do anyway. Quickly, the prince's escort intercepts the guys who end up giving up because it's too complicated. The protagonist notices that her escort has a different way of riding, making them look incredible. The coachman tells the young lady that they have arrived at the Cavendish County. Upon exiting the carriage, Renette greets the Countess, who is surprised to see her there. Renette says she is glad to have arrived before the Countess boarded, precisely because she wanted to give her something before that happened, showing all the purchases she brought for the Countess, including dresses, desserts, accessories, and other things. The lady is speechless at seeing so many gifts and doesn't even know what to say to Miss Brynhilde. However, creating a situation she cannot refuse, the protagonist says she is very happy to hear the news that the Countess's daughter recently gave birth. So these gifts are like a congratulation for the family. Looking at the carriage, Renette asks if that is the Countess's carriage and warns that she will help load the carriage with the things. Pretending to trip, she falls right onto the carriage, which leaves the Countess shocked. And with all those desserts on the ground, Renette apologizes, but gets up and starts stomping on everything just to make that carriage unusable. At a loss for words in this situation, the Countess asks why the young lady is doing this. And with the utmost shamelessness, Renette pretends it was just an accident, telling the Countess not to worry because her carriage is in perfect condition. And because of this incident, Renette offers to take the Countess to Lideborn in her carriage. A blonde girl is happy to see the Countess but is surprised to see the protagonist, asking who she is. The Countess introduces Renette to Mary Lawrence, and the protagonist says, "It's a pleasure to meet her." Mary gets excited, saying she has heard a lot about Renette and invites her for tea. However, the protagonist declines, saying she needs to go to town and the two should enjoy their time together. Moreover, she asks if it would be possible to take their coachman along. Obviously, the Countess agrees and tells him to help Renette in town. The protagonist knows that this way the Countess will be safe, so it would be better to take a look around. While eating a cake at the cafe, Renette realizes that the mission will be more difficult with little time. Even so, she is suspicious of the coachman, since he seemed suspicious from the start, especially since he appeared to be trembling since early on. According to Countess Cavendish, the coachman has worked for them for many years, but he seems very suspicious for someone she knows. While she was thinking this, the coachman approaches and says he is hungry, asking if he can step away for a few minutes. Renette agrees and watches as he walks away, determined to follow him. After a while, she notices that he only ate sandwiches and sweets. He is probably going to another place now. Apparently, he stopped in front of the Schumann's Pigeon store. The man asks if the coachman can confirm that the address is indeed the Rose Garden of the Royal Palace. As soon as he confirms, the man releases the pigeon with a message tied to its leg. At the Royal Palace, one of the maids tells the young lady that she has a letter, brutally snatches the letter from the girl's hand. As Gisela reads the letter, she is perplexed. While she burns the letter, Gisela says that since there is another person with the Countess, the coachman thinks it's better to continue the plan after the person returns to the castle. But Gisela believes he is very foolish for taking so long to eliminate someone, and warns Madame Anna to send the thugs who are after the carriage to burn the whole carriage at once. The Madame questions about the coachman's life. Gisela says she never said she wouldn't eliminate him too, so it doesn't matter. Questioning once again, she asks about the money promised to the coachman's son, but Gisela cuts her off, asking why she is so talkative. After all, what is the use of money for the son's education when he no longer has a father? Back at Mary's house. But unfortunately, the Countess says she has an engagement the next day, so she couldn't wait. Renette remembers that after confronting the coachman about where he went, the guy got nervous. saying she is suspecting him without reason. However, since she doesn't have concrete evidence against him, it doesn't help much. Mary suggests they sleep there and leave as soon as the sun rises, which the protagonist thinks is a good idea. But before she agrees, the Countess says she couldn't, since Miss Brynhild is with her. The protagonist tries to say it's no problem for her, but the two seem not to be listening, and they say goodbye, promising to see each other again soon. Poor Renette was completely ignored. She calls the coachman while he is loading the carriage, saying that her dress got dirty during the day, so she will need to change in the carriage as soon as they leave. Therefore, they will keep the curtains closed during the journey. On the way back, Renette notices that she doesn't see any horses or carriages nearby. The Countess becomes a little scared, asking why the carriage is going so fast, and asks the young lady to inform the coachman, but Renette seems to have other plans, since she just turns to the Countess and asks, "Do you trust me?" Obviously, after everything we've seen so far, the Countess responds that she does not, like any sensible person would, but the protagonist doesn't care, and while holding the Countess's hand, she says that this will be necessary anyway. Quickly, she opens the carriage door and throws herself out, holding the Countess. A few seconds later, the carriage stops and explodes, catching fire. The two are lying on the ground after jumping. The Countess quickly gets up, and looking back, she realizes what could have happened to her if they hadn't jumped. Even Renette is shocked at how this worked out, not believing that they were able to blow up the entire carriage. The coachman probably didn't make it, and they were lucky to have jumped beforehand. Taking the Countess's hand, the protagonist tells them to run. But the lady notices one thing. Renette's ankle is clearly swollen and red, but she keeps saying that she is fine and that they need to get out of there. A few seconds later, they manage to hide behind a tree. One of the henchmen finds it incredible how even nobles burn just like everyone else. However, he notices something behind them. There seem to be footprints in the bushes, and he asks the others to look around. Renette assures the Countess that they need to stay silent. After a while searching, one of the guys says he doesn't believe there are any more people there besides them, and they start to walk away, until one of the guys appears in the tree behind Renette, saying he found some rats. The protagonist is in shock. What should she do now? They say that they shouldn't have been able to escape and need to finish the job. While Renette tries to think of a way to get them out of there, she is interrupted by the Countess's scream. One of the men threatens her with a knife, saying that if the young lady wants to save her, she has to stay very quiet. The protagonist realizes that this is really the end. Maybe she should try to at least save the Countess from this. However, before she can get closer, the Countess screams for her to run, but the guy quickly covers her mouth and tells her to be quiet. And raising the dagger, he says he will make an example of her. Blood flies onto Renette's face while she is in shock, and trembling, she feels relieved to see Her Majesty. He drops the sword and runs towards her, worried, embracing her for being alive. Renette asks how he managed to find them, and crying, she says she was very scared. The prince hugs her tighter and apologizes for being late, ordering the guards to quickly capture the henchmen. One of the guards kneels in front of the prince and reports that they have captured all the henchmen. However, they do not confess who ordered them and question whether it would be better to torture them. Cillian asks how the two are doing, and the guard says they are already in the carriage being escorted by the guards, heading to the Countess's daughter's house. Hearing that they are safe and far away, Cillian kicks the door of the henchmen's hideout in anger, and they inside fear for their lives seeing the prince's reaction, who asks just once who is behind this. Realizing that one of the guys seemed to be the leader, the prince approaches him, who tries to say something but has his mouth covered. Without mercy, the prince uses his sword on him, several times. After finishing with the leader, he asks the guard to take the other two to the palace prison, but the guard warns that whoever hired them will probably try to kill them before the interrogation. Seeing that the prince remains firm with his order, the guard asks why he eliminated that other henchman. Smiling, Cillian says that the guy dared to touch something very valuable. As soon as they arrive at Mary's house, the Countess's daughter becomes very worried, because the two are in horrible condition and asks if they are hurt. Renette says she is fine, but the Countess needs treatment. However, the Countess just says to call the doctor since she injured her ankle. Mary tells Renette to go in, and the doctor will come soon. As the daughter leaves, the Countess begins to approach the protagonist, calling her name. Renette, realizing that she will have to give some explanations, begins to say that she found out unintentionally about the accident and that it would be very difficult to convince her of what was going to happen. But before she finishes speaking, the Countess holds her hands and thanks her from the bottom of her heart for saving her. Since, because of this, she will now be able to see her daughter and her grandson for more years, which Renette is happy to have helped. After being examined, the doctor says that she twisted her ankle, so the ideal would be for her to rest for at least a week. and if she doesn't improve, she will need a new diagnosis. Raynette tries to get up as she says goodbye to the doctor, but the prince holds her, saying that she cannot be walking around. The doctor says goodbye, and there is a somewhat awkward atmosphere between the two. Raynette asks if he is angry with her. The prince does not answer, but sits beside her, saying that, in fact, he is angry because she got hurt, which the protagonist says was just a little twist. It was nothing serious. But Cillian holds her face and says that she has scratches all over her face and neck, besides her ankle, which is twisted, and the other foot full of wounds. Pinching her nose, he says that acting cute won't get her out of this, since he doesn't remember her mentioning that she was going to meet Countess Cavendish. Acting cute. Raynette says it was something very insignificant, that the main reason she got hurt was something very insignificant, that the main reason she got hurt was that she really went. Cillian remembers that what she said was that she was going to see dresses. And laughing, he looks at her and says that she was lying, asking if she really thinks he would let her walk around alone. Shocked, Raynette asks if he already knew everything, but Cillian just replies that he was worried about her safety. That's why the guards were following her, keeping a safe distance so she wouldn't notice. However, this consideration that made them stay further away ended up costing both of them some injuries. And if something worse had happened, the prince doesn't even know what he would do. Raynette tries to reassure him, saying that he found her and saved her, so everything is fine. He says he almost went crazy thinking he could lose her, and the prince doesn't even know what he would do, and Raynette apologizes for worrying him, which makes her embarrassed for not having trusted him before, and he asks her to never get hurt again. They spend some time hugging until Raynette starts to realize that they have been hugging for a long time. Finally, the prince stands up and says that he thinks she knows things that he doesn't know. Continuing, he says that he finds it strange, since Herod said that her memories were erased, but Raynette cuts off the conversation, saying that if she really knew anything, she would probably have avoided getting hurt. The prince lets it go and just agrees. Saying that he just needs to understand why everything she worries about ends up happening in reality. And because of that, she ends up solving problems as if she were expecting them to happen. Could it just be coincidence? Raynette tries to look away and do everything to avoid answering, but the prince turns her face to him and tells her to answer him if by any chance she can see the future. However, how is Raynette going to tell him that this world is actually inside a novel, that he will become addicted to black magic potions and turn into a tyrant who destroys the empire? Simply, there is no way for her to tell him that. She decides to respond to the prince that, at the masked ball, she heard that the countess's daughter had recently had a baby, and therefore, she decided to stop by to leave celebration gifts, and that was how she got involved in the carriage accident. The prince questions if that is really all, to which Raynette says yes, because if she had known the future, she wouldn't have been so scared. The prince agrees, saying that she must have been very scared, and instead of comforting her, he is questioning. Thus, he apologizes for letting her get hurt. The protagonist says it's okay, that it's not his fault, and that she only said she was scared because she wanted to see him worried about her, since he was just arguing with her. It seems that the sentence didn't come out as expected, because the prince responds that he was already so worried about her, and she wants him to worry even more. But before he speaks, Raynette is afraid he might be angry and tries to correct her sentence, but he just places his hand on her head and says that she really drives him crazy, and she probably knows that just the fact of her smiling like that makes him do anything for her. I think it's about time for a kiss, right guys? That one was unconscious. We need more. This was the ideal moment. Celia gets up and says it's getting late and she must be very tired, so it would be good for her to rest. Before leaving, he comments that if she makes him worry again, she will get a beating. Raynette protests, saying that she is not a child, and violence is not the solution, to which the prince just laughs and leaves. Irritated, Raynette cannot understand why he is treating her like a child, when just seconds ago she was really thinking she had a crush on him. While taking a shower, the prince thinks that he really cannot take his eyes off her for a second, and how he will manage to keep her safe. And the author gives us this beautiful image. Smiling during the shower, he adds that this is the only way out. In Gisella's room, she is irritated to know that her plan has failed and her henchmen were still caught by the prince. Outraged, she breaks things and pushes the maid, telling her not to interfere, saying that she is going to prison to silence those useless ones. While walking through the basement, Gisella is still furious, thinking that those idiots were captured precisely by the prince, and she ends up overhearing a conversation of someone asking if they believe they will be executed, and the other responding, no. Moreover, one of them says that if he had known they would be locked in a cell, he would probably take the opportunity to have fun with that girl. The other comments that this happened because they were probably distracted by those silver hairs, and asks if perhaps that girl was the daughter of a woman, since they did not look alike at all, when the other responds that he only noticed she was very hot. Back at the palace, Renette has just woken up from her sleep, but is still feeling a lot of pain in her body. Her eyes are extremely swollen, and she wonders if it was because she had been crying the night before. But at the same time she is looking at herself in the mirror, she hears His Majesty asking if he can come in. Desperate so he doesn't see her in that situation, Renette replies, no, and that he should wait a bit. Independent, he simply enters and says that it's good she is awake, to which she complains about why he asked, since he was going to enter anyway. But looking at the bed, he only sees a big ball of sheets. First a cat, then a person, and now a giant loaf of bread. It's the only comment the prince makes upon seeing this scene. Renette says that she looks horrible. That's why she hid. And the prince, worried that she is sick, pulls the blanket. But when he looks, it doesn't seem like she is sick, just with her little eyes swollen, which makes him laugh, finding her even cute. Holding her face, Cillian comments that she really doesn't look well. Her wounds seem swollen, and her little swollen eyes are very cute, but he worries if she is feeling any pain. He still complains that because of her, his heart is not doing well due to the worries. And if he dies young, the blame will be entirely hers. Renette says he doesn't need to say that, since he will live a long life. Cillian just replies that to achieve that, he needs her to cooperate. And the protagonist asks how she should cooperate. At that moment, Cillian holds her hand and says that they should get married. While kissing her hand, he repeats again for her to marry him, which was totally unexpected and left the protagonist embarrassed and speechless. And the prince, smiling, just repeats again for her to marry him. Renette pulls her hand and tells him to stop teasing her like that, to which he simply replies that he was being serious. The protagonist asks, if he is serious, how could she marry him? Cillian questions why she couldn't. Renette explains that neither of them knows who she really is, and there is a lot they still need to discover. Moreover, she is not a true duchess. Cillian agrees with the facts, but still questions why that would be a problem. And if she is hesitant to marry him, while kissing Renette's hair, he tells her to then use him however she wants. The protagonist doesn't quite understand what he means by that, and the prince says that's exactly it, that she should use him and use her power by marrying him, especially because how would she gain access to the royal files without being married to him, which leaves Renette perplexed, as she hadn't thought of that. He even teases her by asking if she plans to contact the count to turn into a cat and enter the files that way every time. Really, not knowing the answer, Renette gets flustered and can't say anything. The prince laughs and says he will give her 3 days to think about it. He then holds her cheek and unfortunately gives her a kiss on the forehead, saying he can't wait any longer than that. Later that same day, everyone is ready to eat, but Mary notices something different and asks if everything is okay with the Duchess. The only thing she can think about is marriage and the proposal the prince made. When Mary calls her again, she gets startled, saying that everything is delightful. But she can't stop thinking about why Cillian brought up the subject of marriage out of nowhere. The Countess says she spotted Mithil. He is the Empress's messenger who brought a message. Renette thinks that probably the Empress already knows everything that happened. The Countess, while taking the message, says she informed the Empress that she couldn't return to the palace for now due to the accident. She is probably sending a response. Upon reading the message, the Countess says that the Empress is happy to know they are well, and also comments that there isn't a day she doesn't think about her son. The prince, seeing the letter, asks the Countess how his mother has been lately, to which she replies that the Empress is trying to recover as best as she can, little by little, and normally she is extremely happy when she receives a letter from her son. Renette realizes that it has been a long time since Cillian wrote a letter to Empress Elise. Could it be because he rarely receives replies? While petting the bird, the prince comments that Mitchell would like to meet Renette. He asks her to come closer and pet him. Looking at the bird, Renette realizes that she might have seen him before turning into a cat, but it seems the bird didn't like her much. It turns and prepares to fly away again. Leaving Renette watching that sight of the bird departing through the window, she then calls the prince and says she believes she has seen Mitchell before. The prince comments that yes, she saw him another day. However, Renette says it wasn't in this house, that from her memory, she saw him in her dreams, just in the early days when she couldn't wake up from the nightmares, where she saw a light in the midst of that darkness. After running so much in her dream, she finally reached the light, and it was there that she remembers seeing Mithil, because it wasn't a light, but rather the bird. Cillian then questions if she means that Mithil appeared in her nightmare and helped her wake up, to which she agrees, certain it was him, but remembers hearing someone's voice too. She can't exactly remember whose voice it was, but knows it was a woman's. The prince then supposes that probably someone sent Mithil into Raynette's dreams, and that perhaps this person could have been the Empress. He states that maybe the best way to understand all this is to ask Her Majesty to send Mithil again, and asks her to rest until they arrive at the palace. Already at the palace, the Emperor learns the news that the carriage Miss Brynhild and Countess Cavendish were in was attacked. The prince tells that thanks to Raynette, they managed to escape unharmed. However, due to the accident, she ended up getting hurt and can't walk without assistance, which even the protagonist is shocked by, because she can walk, just with a little difficulty. The Emperor worries about the injury but questions if she managed to inform the Duke about what happened. Before she answers, she looks to see the prince's expression and says that she hasn't spoken to her father yet. The Emperor says that might be for the best, as her injury seems a bit serious. Making a little drama, she says she appreciates the Emperor's concern, but if it weren't for the prince, she wouldn't be there to tell the story. The Emperor buys the situation and says that as soon as he finds those guys, he will destroy them for doing this. Cillian comments that he received information that the prisoners were brought to the prison, but ended up fighting among themselves and were eliminated. The Emperor questions whether there are no witnesses, but the prince was already prepared for this situation. He found 2 robbers who fled in the morning and have evidence of who hired them. The Emperor then says to bring forth the one who is guilty. In Gisella's chambers, Anne sees a handwriting verification notice. Catherine says they are starting this with the nobles of the castle desperate. Anne asks if she will also be investigated. Smiling, Gisella says that everyone will be, so she should just do as ordered. Trembling, Annie says she only wrote the letter at Gisella's command, and Gisella mocks the situation, saying she will do everything to make Annie comfortable in prison, concluding that she will give the state of Railver to Annie next year. When Annie asks if Railver does not belong to the Hamiltons, Gisella replies that they have been missing for so long that soon the lands will belong to her, and that this is probably enough for Annie's effort. During dinner, the Emperor says it is absurd to have a noble involved and that checking the handwriting will not be well received by them, but Gisella says it is a very important case and the guilty party needs to be found, and she even offers to be tested first. Raynette cannot understand how this viper seems so calm. The butler brings the food. Quickly, Raynette smells that strange odor again. There is probably black magic potion in the food, trying to warn the prince with signals so he understands he should not eat this. However, he only asks if Raynette's head is itching by any chance desperate. She thinks of a way to prevent him from eating and sneezes hard all over the dinner. It creates a tense atmosphere since she is doing this to others' food. The Emperor even tries to tell her to cover her mouth, but it is already too late, and even the poor guy is covered in spit, apologizing. She says she has an allergy and cannot control it. The Emperor asks what kind of allergy it is that seems quite serious. Desperate for a quick answer, Raynette points to the plate saying she is allergic to that thing, the blueberry. While she is embarrassed, the prince tries to hold back his laughter at the situation, and even teases her saying that even though she is allergic to blueberries, her face looks like a tomato. The two whisper to each other while Gisella watches them with a dark expression. Finally opening her mouth, Gisella says that since the allergy seems serious, she will ask for another dish to be brought, but she prevents the butler from taking away the other plates, saying that the prince and the Emperor will eat her food. Trying again, she sneezes, which startles Gisella Raynette, who cannot even stand being near blueberries. The prince suggests that the plates be swapped. Gisella disagrees, but the Emperor joins the prince since he does not want to eat spit-covered food, and instructs the butler to replace all the plates. Seeing that there was no way to circumvent the situation, against her will, Gisella just accepts. The protagonist is happy that her embarrassment was at least worth it. Cillian apologizes to everyone, saying he should have taken better care of Raynette. Then he suggests that the two can eat separately. This way he will take more care of her health. The Emperor asks Raynette's opinion, and she says she will be very grateful for that. As soon as the Emperor agrees, Gisella clearly did not like this idea. Leaving the dining room, walking down the palace corridor, Raynette asks if they do not seem too close to each other. They ended up encountering Commander Macmillan as soon as they exited and were trying to keep their distance. However, for some reason, Raynette feels hostility coming from Gisella, even from afar, which makes the prince laugh at how cute she is acting. However, Raynette comes across a large flight of stairs, and with her injury on her ankle, it will take a long time for her to climb all of it. Obviously, our dear prince picks Raynette up in his arms and says he knew it would be difficult for her to climb alone. She feels embarrassed, saying that there are people seeing his actions, to which he replies that is exactly why he is doing it. Gisella, who will take another path to say goodbye to the prince, just tells him to rest, to which he does not even bother to look back, simply agrees and continues walking. but obviously she would not let it go. So she calls Renette's attention, saying that it seems the young lady is used to being carried by men. Acting this way inside the palace, Gisela questions what her behavior was like in her own home. Cillian becomes quite irritated by the insult and asks the Countess to be careful with her words. Since he won't let it go if she continues to be rude to the visitor, Gisela is shocked because it's the first time the prince shows hostility in this way. And even though she's irritated that he prefers a useless girl like Renette, she apologizes to him. Then, with only her and the commander left, Gisela asks him if he managed to find out if Renette is really the daughter of the Duchess of Brynhild. However, the news is not good, as he warns that he will only receive the report with the answer tomorrow. Even in anger, Gisela doesn't have much to do. Just wait for now. The next day, in the morning, Renette wakes up still feeling sore, and she notices that it is quite clear, even though it is early. She remembers that they mentioned they would go hunting today. Finally, she manages to spot the prince down below, saying that he easily stands out for being tall, but she ends up noticing that Gisela is also there. Probably she went there to send them off, which makes Renette envious, as she wanted to do the same. But of course, our protagonist has an idea. And when the prince is passing some information to the guard, he hears someone shouting his name. Looking up towards the palace, he sees Renette waving from the balcony. But when she looks back at him, he is no longer there. Trying to find him? However, she hears the door open and the prince appears behind her. Shocked at how quickly he was, Renette looks back. But suddenly, he hugs her. She, not understanding anything, asks what is happening, and he simply says that it is dangerous for her to stay on the balcony and questions why she was out there. The protagonist says she just wanted to say goodbye and wish him good luck, and asks if he came there just to see her. However, as soon as he answers that it was precisely for that reason, she questions him about why. While touching her face, Cillian says that every time he sees her, he has no other option but to run to her. It's as if it were instinctive. And then he asks if she understands what he is trying to say. Back in the garden, Gisela is there, still saying goodbye to His Majesty. However, as he passes by her, the commander asks her to respond without looking at him, asking if she found anything in the archives. Gisela replies that she hasn't found anything yet, and the commander warns her that that guy alerted her not to draw attention while investigating the archives, so she just has to focus on finding the item related to Fabian Nelles. She agrees and asks where she can find the young man. The commander says that as soon as she finds the item, everyone is ready to leave. And while she sees them departing, Gisela wonders when the commander will stop trying to humiliate her. Then, trying not to care, she says that today will be the day the message she sent to the Brynhildes will finally arrive. And she wonders what the prince's expression will be when he discovers that the woman is actually a Pablea. In the garden, Renette is asking Hazel where the Countess's room is. Apparently, Hazel is one of the maids who is having tea with her and says that the Countess's room is the third one on the second floor. Apparently, Valon's disciples are joining the castle disguised as servants. Hazel and Gaspard, whom she had already befriended in the county, are now accompanying her, and Renette is happy to have more allies in the castle. The protagonist asks Hazel if she has met the Minister of Magic, Clive MacLean, and asks if he is difficult to talk to. Since she herself has never seen him, Hazel says that can't be true, since he was present at the masked ball and also in the hunting group. She even says that he was standing near the young lady earlier today. Renette remembers that she indeed encountered him earlier, but for some reason she can't recall his face. The two are interrupted by the butler arriving, saying that Countess Gisela is on her way to the casino, to which the protagonist thanks Gaspard for helping. The two talk about the sweets that are delicious to distribute. Renette, looking at the two, thinks that although she feels something dangerous is going to happen, seeing them and having this normal life, sometimes it seems like everything is fine, and she hopes that this calmness continues. But of course not, because someone approaches. Renette, still not looking back, thinks that maybe she was too stressed, and that's why she can't remember MacLean's face. But next time she will make an effort to remember. Renette asks Hazel if the Countess goes to the casino often. However, the two stand up and become rigid, just because Gisela is behind the protagonist, saying she didn't know she was so interested in the Countess's life, still provoking. Gisela says it's impressive how Renette is enjoying her tea and gossiping about her. It's impressive how interested she is in your life. And she even jokes that she can always ask directly if she wants to know something. Then she invites Renette to her room, saying that all the preparations for tea are ready there, and she would like to serve some desserts that she hasn't tried in the city yet. The protagonist knows that this is clearly a trap. However, in her mind, if she can get to the Countess's room, she will have a chance to look for the antidote. So this is her opportunity. Meanwhile, during the hunt, the guard whispers and asks if the prince isn't tired of pretending he doesn't know how to shoot. Everyone at the academy would be shocked to see this scene. And the guard says it's impressive that the prince even managed to fool the emperor, who is bad at shooting. Cillian replies that if the emperor doesn't see him as a threat, that's good for him. Macmillan is the next to shoot. The other men joke that it would be easier for the minister to use magic to get the bird. Then he says yes, it would be easier, but he would like to provide a little entertainment. Valon is surprised to hear that he will use magic when he casts a purple lightning bolt at the little bird, which falls charred to the ground. The other men say this is incredible, saying that this is truly magic. The offended prince asks what the minister is doing using magic to kill a creature without his majesty's permission. Everyone falls silent at the oversight, and the minister says his intention was only to provide a little entertainment and that the prince shouldn't take it so seriously. But it seems that the emperor is on the prince's side today, because he said that magic cannot be used without his permission, even for one's own pleasure. Macmillan then apologizes and says this will not happen again. Looking at the scene of the little bird on the ground, not pleasant, the prince stands up and says he would like to finish early today, saying that this is a bad omen. However, as soon as they arrive at the countess's room, she orders the servants to stay outside. Before entering, Renette looks at Hazel, precisely because she warned that if she hears any commotion, she will act immediately. The protagonist is shocked because the entire room is covered in gold. Gisela tells her to feel free to look around the room, and the foolish protagonist still accepts, thinking she would be able to find the essence of black magic, realizing that she doesn't feel anything inside the room, and not even from the area where they are having coffee. Probably. At that moment, she feels the black magic flowing towards a door, and she is sure that is where the essence is. Gisela asks if Renette is interested in going to her closet, saying she heard that she is interested in dresses. However, at the same time, Gisela puts something inside the protagonist's little bag. As soon as they enter, Renette realizes that she is indeed the emperor's favorite, since even her closet is bathed in gold and very luxurious. When the two are already inside, Gisela says she had forgotten to give some orders to some servants, and says she will need to step out for a moment. Renette says she will return to her room. Renette says she will go back to her room, but Gisela says she will be quick so the young lady can feel free, asking why she doesn't take the opportunity to look at the dresses in the meantime. Renette knows that Gisela is plotting something, but she doesn't want to miss this opportunity to find the essence. When she realizes that Gisela has already left and the door is closed, she quickly heads towards where she feels the black magic. And when she opens the drawer, there are 4 little bags. The protagonist finds it quite peculiar that she is storing this so openly. Upon opening the bag, she sees that there is a yellow powder inside. It looks like just an ancient coral powder. And she remembers that the prince once told her they use ancient coral powder as a dehumidifier inside closets. Renette realizes that this is how she probably managed to hide it without looking suspicious. When she opens the bag to put one of the powders in, she sees that there is a ring in her bag. And she gets a little irritated thinking that Gisela was trying to blame her for being a thief. Thinking about what to do with the ring, she decides to put it in a jewelry box that is sitting on top. However, as soon as she opens the box, a nauseating smell fills the air. Renette starts to feel unwell and dizzy. And inside the box, there are practically 10 corrupted rings. Realizing there is a letter inside the jewelry box, Renette thinks about taking it to see what it is. And upon reading the letter, she realizes it contains the prayers of Fabian Nellis and questions why the Countess has this. Obviously, Gisela is able to visit the royal archives freely, but why would she have a handwritten copy of this prayer? Renette thinks about taking the letter and a ring as well. However, knowing that Gisela will try to blame her and check her bag, she cannot hide it there, thinking of a solution to get all this outside. Renette notices there is a small garden just below the window, and perhaps it would be the better option to throw these items there to retrieve later. When she hears the door opening, she acts quickly and puts the letter and the ring inside the bag and throws them out the window, hoping that no one picks them up. But she remembers she didn't get rid of that diamond ring and throws it in the corner. For now, Gisela enters the room apologizing for taking so long. Turning quickly, the protagonist says it's no problem since she has so many beautiful dresses. She managed to pass the time quickly. Smiling, Gisela says she is happy that Miss Brynhild liked her clothes and asks if there is anything that the lady would like to keep for herself. Not understanding why Gisela is asking this, Renette questions why, but Gisela now with a more hostile expression asks if she didn't understand, and if she needs to repeat herself, calling her Irina Scott. Not quite understanding, the protagonist asks who Irina Scott is and what Gisela is talking about, But before she can finish her sentence, the Countess slaps her in the face, causing her to fall to the ground with the force. Screaming, Gisela asks how Renette dares to pretend to be a duchess when she is simply a maid. Not satisfied, she pulls the protagonist by the hair. And outside, two maids are holding Hazel back from entering the room. Pulling the protagonist by the hair, Gisela asks if the prince fell in love with her pretty face, and wonders if he will still be in love after she ruins Renette's face. Not understanding what is happening, Renette tries to ask what Gisela is talking about, but she is thrown to the ground and the Countess steps on her injured heel. Her vision starts to blur after a while of Gisela kicking the protagonist while she is down, and trying to protect herself. She screams that she is really Renette Brynhilde and that Catherine is crazy. Renette tries to break free, tired of being beaten and realizing that Hazel won't be able to enter the room. But the Countess seems stronger than she imagined, and looking towards the door, she pleads for someone to help her. At that moment, the door swings open violently, but with her vision blurred, Renette can only see that there is a person at the door. A few seconds later, her vision clears and she realizes it is Prince Celia breathing quickly, probably from running. She starts to cry with happiness upon seeing him, and he approaches asking if she is okay and if she can get up. However, he notices that besides all the bruises on her face, neck, even her clothes are torn. He takes off his coat and asks her to put it on. Fearless, Gisela says she finally understood who put this brat inside the palace. But before she finishes her sentence, the prince, drawing his sword, threatens her throat. Making a cut with the tip of the sword on Gisela's neck, he asks how she dares. But before the situation worsens, the emperor opens the door calling for the prince, and asking what he is doing with the sword threatening Gisela. Pretending innocence, Gisela starts to cry, asking for his majesty to help her. The emperor shouts again, ordering him to put away the sword, but the prince says he will only do that if the emperor makes Gisela pay for all her crimes. Not understanding, the emperor asks what kind of crime she committed. Finally noticing Renette all bruised, he says that if she really committed a crime, he himself will punish her. Gisela starts shouting that that damned girl is a Pablea pretending to be a duchess, and she attacked Gisela when confronted. Renette is shocked to see how cynical Gisela can be. Gisela then explains that she had seen a maid in the palace who looked exactly like Renette. So because of that, she found it strange and decided to investigate. The people from the city of Duke Brynhilde confirmed that they had never heard of any son or daughter of the Duke. So she is probably using the fact that the Duke does not leave the duchy, and disguising herself as the Duchess to stay in the palace. Because of this, Gisela says she invited her to her room to clear up the misunderstanding, but she refused and attacked the Countess. The Emperor, furious hearing so many lies, it is so good when the villain is caught in a lie. Not understanding, Gisela questions how he can be going there, and the Emperor warns that he received a letter from him today, that the Duke of Brynhild is coming precisely to check on how his daughter is doing. Trembling, Gisela questions how this can be possible. The Emperor asks if Renette was aware of the Duke's visit, but she says he did not mention anything about visiting her. He then understands that it was probably a surprise, and still questions how Gisela, who is a clever person, can escalate a misunderstanding like this with the Duchess. The prince says that Renette is hurt, so he will take her to get treated. Agreeing, the Emperor says he will do that, and that he can rest assured. But of course, Celian will not let it go easily and asks if she is not at least going to apologize. Still trying her story clueless, Gisela tells the Emperor that this is not fair, even if that damned woman is really the true Duchess. The fact that she attacked the Countess and even stole her ring does not change. Renette says that if necessary, they can search her, because she is sure she is innocent. The Emperor thanks her for her cooperation and sends the maids to check. After a while checking Renette's clothes, the maids return and say they found the ring, which Gisela is already super happy about. However, they say they found it under a mirror, insisting on her madness. Gisela starts shouting, asking if they checked properly, because Renette could very well have thrown the ring while they weren't looking. The furious Emperor orders Gisela to apologize immediately. Irritated but cornered, Gisela feels hatred for how that damned woman dares to deceive everyone like this. But she maintains her act, approaches Renette, and hugs Renette, saying that she is very sorry that this is all her fault. She doesn't know how she made such a silly mistake, and probably, since the Empress is absent, things ended up overwhelming and got out of control. Pretending to cry, she questions if Renette will not be good enough to forgive her. Stunned by such shamelessness, Renette thinks she was accused, beaten, and now Gisela is trying to put all this on the Empress for being absent. The Emperor, even before the protagonist's response, says he hopes Renette understands that Gisela is not usually like this. Obviously, the villain is already laughing there. seeing that the emperor is still 100% on her side. The prince says that this lame excuse will not fly, but before he finishes, Renette says she accepts, that she would not like to escalate things, so she prefers to end everything now. However, she makes a point of saying that she is sure that if it were the empress who had this doubt, she would never insult Renette like this, kind of implying that someone without class like Gisela would not be able to. So Renette says she forgives the countess. However, she will not forget what happened today, being carried again by the prince down the hallway. He, still irritated, says that this is absurd. Gisela's audacity to not only attack Renette, but also accuse her of theft is truly impressive. Renette asks him to come a little closer so they can talk. Then she says that technically she did take something, which leaves him shocked. How so? But she tries to explain before he continues his judgment, warning that she did what she had to do to find the antidote. Hazel quickly went outside to get the little bag and brought it back to Renette's room. And she is shocked at how Hazel can touch this with her own hands. Not understanding, the maid says she feels nothing coming from the bag. And the prince agrees, saying he also cannot feel absolutely anything. Renette wonders if she saw the energy coming from that bag wrong. But as soon as she opens it a little, again that evil energy emanates from inside. She quickly recoils, and the prince asks if she is okay since she is shaking a lot. Finally, she realizes that only she can feel this negative energy coming from the black magic. The protagonist responds to the prince, saying that she is fine, and Hazel says she will deliver the bag to Gaspar, which worries Renette, as there will be no one to help her change the bandages. The prince, obviously, volunteers for this role. However, Renette feels a little embarrassed, since it will be a bit difficult for him to bandage her back and thighs. Embarrassed for having thought impure things about Renette, he takes the bag from Hazel's hand and says he will deliver it to Gaspar himself. Before either of the two can say anything, he slams the door as he leaves. She asks Hazel if she said something wrong, to which the maid laughs, realizing the romance between the two. She even tells Renette that it's funny she is the only person who doesn't realize the prince likes her. Finally, the protagonist questions whether the prince really likes her. And if that's how he appears to others, Gaspar receives the little bag and says he will take it immediately to investigate and make the antidote. While the two are still outside waiting for the carriage to depart, the guard asks how Miss Renette is doing, since rumors have spread saying she was beaten due to a fight with Countess Gisela. When the prince is about to answer the question, but he knows that all of this is a lie, no matter how brave she is. At the moment he opened the door, she was truly in need of help and calling for help. How bad he feels when he sees her crying. And then he comes to the conclusion that only in stories would a protagonist arrive. That Renette is suffering for being near him? That's right, folks. You can't just be together. However, we have hope that even thinking this, he still wants to be close to her forever. Feeling bad about it? No, son, don't worry. You're absolutely right. You have to stay close to her. You have to kiss her. You have to be together and have children. That's it. Before the prince returns to the palace, the guard asks why he kept the ring. Cillian replies that he needs to check something, and as soon as he finishes, he will send it to Valon as well. The guard understands and comments that there is something about Minister Macmillan that the prince had asked about, saying that the minister is at the theater in the city of Claude at the moment, and it is reported that he goes to watch the opera once every 3 months. The prince probably realizes that he is plotting something. The guard agrees, since if it were for the love of opera, he would go more often. Cillian then asks him to continue watching the minister's movements. The nosy guard still asks if the prince is going to meet Renette, to which the prince agrees. The guard comments that he feels bad for her, since she always ends up getting into trouble since she came to the palace, and he wouldn't blame her if she wanted to leave as soon as she finished what was agreed upon, since if she stays longer, she will just become another spectacle for the nobles. The prince realizes that the guard has an important point, and says that soon no one will be able to make her go through these problems anymore, since she will become the empress, which shocks the guard. And he questions if the two are going to get married, to which the prince simply agrees, as if it were something already arranged. The guard then asks when he had time to prepare a proposal, and the clueless prince responds with a new question. What preparations would he need just to say a sentence? In disbelief, the guard confirms if he really just asked her to marry him without preparing anything, to which the prince totally agrees. Shocked by such insensitivity, the guard judges him completely, and says that no woman would be happy with such a marriage proposal, and she will definitely refuse. Heading towards Renette's room, Cillian can't understand why the guard was making a big deal out of all this. But thinking better, Cillian hadn't thought much about the marriage proposal, since for him the most important thing is that the wedding day is perfect, as it would be a unique experience in Renette's life. but perhaps the moment of the proposal is just as important as the wedding day, remembering that she didn't even smile when he proposed to her, which on one hand was expected since he didn't give her a ring or flowers. He just said it bluntly. Realizing his mistake, the prince panics a little. As soon as he enters the room, Rainette is happy to see him and says that Hazel just changed all her bandages, showing that the swellings have improved a lot and her mother even made a cream to improve even more. In a dry manner, he just replies that that's good. Then he decides to ask her something, to which she responds, "Oh, you mean having access to the royal archives?" At that moment, he realizes that everything went wrong. Rainette comments that she thought about the matter and that marriage really seems like a very efficient alternative for what they want to do. He truly sees that she is confusing everything, but it's also his fault for not being clear enough in the proposal. Now she is only seeing the wedding ring symbolizing a partnership just to gain access to the royal files, and he finally understands that this is his fault. So, to top it all off, she says she was thinking, and that she agrees they should get married, which seems to be the final blow for Cillian to realize the mess he made. At the theater, one of the staff comes to greet the minister, saying he rushed over when he heard about the visit, and the minister comments that he is happy the tickets are selling well. He mentions that he noticed a buzz on the first floor. The staff comments that there was a misunderstanding between Gisela and Miss Rainette at the palace, so everyone is talking about it. He himself doesn't know the details, but it seems the fight was ugly. The staff then says goodbye and asks the minister to enjoy the show. Irritated, the minister thinks he warned Gisela to stay out of trouble, since to obtain the artifact that Fabian Nellis left behind, he needs her to access the royal files. However, the fact that she is causing trouble at the palace could end up ruining his plans. The show begins, and Macmillan thinks he wouldn't want to have to do this, but it seems he has no choice. He says he can't keep an actress on stage who has already finished her role. The next morning at the castle, Rainette wakes up still feeling a bit sore. Hazel, noticing she is awake, comments that the emperor left her a gift earlier, a cream to heal wounds and bruises that they use at the palace. However, Hazel comments that he took a while to bring this after what happened. Rainette knows that the main reason is that Duke Brynhilde is on his way to the castle, so they will probably try to treat her very well. However, Hazel comments that the emperor doesn't know, but they have the best ointment made by Irina with only top-quality herbs, besides not being given out of obligation but out of love and care from her mother to Rainette. A bit embarrassed, the protagonist says she is very grateful for this. Hazel comments that she noticed Rainette seems not to realize how much the people around her take care of her. She apologizes for intruding, but in the short time they have been together, this is what she has been able to perceive. Especially one person. Prince Cillian. Rainette, blushing, asks if Hazel is teasing her, to which she replies that obviously not, since just this morning the prince came to see how she was, asking about her injuries and asking Hazel to take care of the protagonist. While Rai, the maid, says that the prince really likes Rainette a lot, to which she, embarrassed, says she is not sure, and questions whether it might be true, thinking about some of his actions. Sometime later, Rainette is crying, wanting to leave the room. After the news of the fight between the two spread, she has to stay in her room to avoid further speculation from the nobles. Meanwhile, that viper is strolling freely. Irritated, Rainette goes back to her bed, thinking that maybe it would be good to relax a bit. She remembers that yesterday, Her Majesty seemed a bit flustered. Could she have confused the real reason for the marriage? He seemed to want just a bond between the two and not a marriage for love, which reminds her of the protagonist from the original novel. Suddenly, she hears someone calling her and gets startled. The prince apologizes and didn't realize she was sleeping. Seeing that he is incredibly close, Rainette turns very red and quickly sits up in bed asking why he didn't knock before entering. Even though he says he knocked before, she warns him that he has to wait for a response to enter. However, she notices that he is holding a bouquet of flowers and a pile of gifts scattered around the room. Clearing his throat, the prince corrects Rainette's thought and says that it is not anyone's birthday, but rather a marriage proposal. She is shocked and asks if it would be for her, to which he agrees, saying that one of his subordinates commented that no woman would be happy with a proposal that consists of just words, holding the bouquet in front of her. While trembling, he asks if she would like to marry him. Wow, guys, could this ship finally sail? Please, no more misunderstandings. Rainette, without answering, just smells the flowers while smiling. Then she responds that yes. After all, the flowers are very beautiful, which makes the prince confused, wondering if it is just because of the flowers. She quickly corrects him, saying that it is not just because of the flowers completing. She says that, in fact, she is very moved that he did this. But before she finishes the sentence, he kisses her cheek. While Rainette is shocked, he simply says, "Thank you, my dear wife." She screams that they are not officially married yet, while he takes something out of his pocket saying that he brought an engagement ring for her. But he pulls out a dagger from the sheath, which leaves Reinette confused. Cillian then says he will explain, showing a tube. He comments that this is called pyramida. It is a magical object that changes the shape of an object based on what you put inside. He then cuts a piece of his hand, letting a few drops of blood fall into the pot. Next, he asks for a piece of her hair, and the moment the hair falls into the tube, it turns into a beautiful red gem. Cillian says that this means they are bonded by marriage. In the past, when a war occurred, nobles had to stay on the front lines alongside the royal family. Because of this, many nobles did not return from battle. So in some cases, they used the pyramida to prove the marriage they had entered into before going. Placing the gem in Reinette's hand, he says that it is now hers. Saying that this gem proves they are officially married, Reinette says that they are not at war now, and if this is really necessary. However, the prince replies that the official marriage will take time and Gisela will probably oppose it. But if she wants, he can show how the gem works right now. I hope it involves a kiss. Later that night, heading towards a very well-guarded door, Cillian and Reinette approach, which startles the guard. The prince says he needs to enter the archives with Miss Brynhild. Seeing the guard denying access, as only the royal family can enter, Reinette says, and shows that the prince gave her a pyramida. Both are shocked and ask if by any chance they got married. The prince asks them not to spread it to everyone. One of the guards signals for the other to quickly fetch the chaser. The chaser is a solution to verify the authenticity of the pyramida. When a drop falls on a genuine pyramida, a light comes out of the gem and envelops the fingers of both people bonded by marriage. As soon as they check the light, the guards ask them to enter, and the prince helps her walk to the entrance. For the first time, Reinette realizes that Cillian has always been very affectionate with her. As they enter, Reinette is impressed by the size of the place. She then asks what the mission is for today, but the prince can only be impressed by Reinette's beauty. He says that his wife is quick to know things. Then he shows Gisela's ring, saying that he wants to check one thing. Cillian believes that the Countess has a copy of the prayers, and since Reinette mentioned that she felt no magic coming from her, she probably uses a magical item. His hypothesis is that this ring is that item. Searching for Whippard's prayer book, Cillian approaches one of the shelves. The ring quickly starts to shine and tremble, reacting. They then try to follow where the ring is guiding until they approach the book that Cillian was looking for. Since the ring is reacting even away from its owner, it probably contains magic. Probably Gisela received this ring from someone else, someone close to her who knows how to use magic. The two realize, a bit late, but okay, that the true culprit behind all this is Minister Cliver McLean. Now there are only two questions left. Was the ring made at Gisela's request? Or did Cliver create the ring and give it to Gisela? However, what can be concluded is that they are both working together, but they still don't know why the ring reacts to Fabian Nellis's book. Reinette questions if it might not be like the pyramida when it reacts to the chaser. The prince says that if that is the case, probably the ring contains the very Fabian Nellis. The next day in the garden, the guard is shocked to learn that Cillian and Reinette got married. My son, I'm more shocked that there was a wedding and no kiss happened. Since it was very quick, the guard asks if by any chance the prince used pyramida, which he admits to having used. Still shocked by the news, the guard doesn't know what to ask first. Finally, he manages to question the prince about how he got Reinette to agree to this, which makes the prince question himself as well, how she accepted to marry him so easily. However, just yesterday after the incident, Reinette proposed a divorce in 6 months, which caught the prince off guard, realizing that the mission had not yet been completed. He simply replies, no, and Reinette asks him to think carefully. Cillian asks if it's because in 6 months, she won't need to access the archives anymore, to which he says no, but that it would be for his own good. The problem is that Reinette is worried about the original plot of the story where Cillian and Vanessa end up falling in love and getting married. Obviously, the prince has no idea what she means by that, but he is firm in his decision not to divorce her. The protagonist decides to try another approach and then asks him to promise that they will stay married even if he falls in love with someone else in 6 months. Not understanding anything, the prince asks what she means, and she replies that if he feels the same way in 6 months as he does today, then she will no longer talk about divorce. Reinette internally still doubts why His Highness makes her think she can have more than she deserves. She also adds that if he remains faithful to her during those 6 months to the point that she asks him to stay, she will give up on the divorce. Cillian still cannot understand why she thinks he will change his mind, and if by any chance she doesn't believe him, he will have to work hard to show her. The poor guy, besides being ignored while the prince thought about the agreement with Reinette, also got beaten up, poor thing. Cillian still finds it curious that the only thing she is asking for is for him to be faithful, knowing that he is already her little puppy. Hazel and Gerald rush into the room wanting to know if it's true that the two got married. Embarrassed, Renette questions how they found out about this. The two are very happy for them, and Hazel comments that the whole palace already knows. She also mentions that the marriage means Whippert will have a new owner. The protagonist doesn't understand what she means, but Hazel explains that the heir prince's marriage often means he is ready to take the throne. Therefore, soon the prince will be crowned emperor. Gerald agrees with Hazel, and states that now Emperor Adolf will need to start preparations to pass on the crown. Someone interrupts the conversation by knocking on the door. It's the prince asking if he can come in. The two leave to let the lovebirds be alone. Cillian still agrees that the two know how to read the room better than Renette herself. The protagonist asks why they should go see the emperor now. The prince agrees and says he dressed up especially for this occasion, to which Renette says he really does look more handsome today, giving a boost to the boy's self-esteem. He says he is happy that she noticed he dressed up more because of her. Poor protagonist is not used to this straightforward husband of hers. The prince still comments that he is trying hard to impress her and show that there is no way he will change his mind, while affectionately playing with Renette's hair and kisses her, calling her wife, in the emperor's room. He is in shock upon hearing the news, which the butler confirms that indeed the prince and Miss Renette got married using the permita last night. He also says that the likely goal is the ascension to the throne, which clearly stresses the emperor. Throwing dishes around the room. Consumed by hatred, Adolf can only think that this is a way for the prince to challenge his own father. And with that, he thinks about taking revenge and showing who is really in charge. That's it, folks. We finished the first season of The Possessive Tyrant and His Sleepy Cat. This was chapter 46. After you all almost finished with all the comments asking for this part 2, I had to do it. So I hope you watch everything and recommend it to others. And who knows, I might bring part 3 that will focus more on their romance finally. So don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. 200K views on this video and I'll bring part 2. Kisses, and see you next time.